The carriage rattled through frozen mud, carrying Elara Whitmore toward a fate she didn't choose. They called him the Wolf of the Blacklands. Darius Blackthorne, the man she'd been sold to like livestock. Her father's debts, her family's ruin, all of it now her burden to bear. She'd heard the whispers. Brutal, merciless, a killer hiding behind a lord's title. The estate loomed ahead, dark stone against darker sky, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. This wasn't a marriage, it was a transaction, and she was the price. Want to know if she survives? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain started 3 miles from Blackthorn Estate. Not the gentle spring kind that nourished crops and filled wells. This was the punishing, relentless rain that turned roads into rivers and made travelers question every decision that led them into the storm. Elara watched it hammer against the carriage window, each drop a tiny fist demanding entry, and thought about turning back. Stupid thought. There was nothing to turn back to. Miss Whitmore, we're nearly there. The driver's voice carried through the small opening in the roof, muffled by weather and wood. He'd barely spoken to her since they left the city 12 hours ago. Maybe he'd been warned. Maybe transporting cargo to the wolf's den didn't encourage conversation. Elara pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of wheels against stone. The road had improved in the last mile. Less mud, more cobblestone. Someone maintained this path, kept it passable even in weather like this. That surprised her. Everything she'd heard about Darius Blackthorne suggested a man who let things rot, who ruled through fear and neglect. Stories, her mother had said 3 days ago when the contract was signed. Just stories to keep people in line. Her mother had been pale as milk when she said it, hands trembling around a teacup she never drank from. Lying, probably. Or hoping. Hard to tell the difference anymore. The carriage lurched through a pothole deep enough to rattle Elara's teeth. Her traveling bag slid across the bench, spilling its contents. 2 dresses, a book of poetry she'd never finish, her grandmother's silver hairbrush. All of it second-hand or third-hand, because the Whitmores had been selling everything that wasn't nailed down for the past 2 years. She gathered the items slowly, methodically. Control the small things when the large ones spiral away. That had been her father's advice, back when he still gave advice instead of apologies. The estate appeared through the rain like a predator emerging from fog. Blackthorn Hall wasn't beautiful. It was a fortress pretending to be a home, all dark stone and sharp angles, windows like narrow eyes watching the approach. No gardens, no decorative gates, no pretense of welcome. Just walls and towers and the message they sent. This is not a place for comfort. The carriage stopped beneath a covered portico. Elara waited for the driver to open her door, but he didn't. She heard him climb down, heard his boots on wet stone, heard him speaking to someone in tones too low to catch. Then nothing. She opened the door herself. The cold hit her first, mountain air with teeth in it, nothing like the mild chill of the capital. She stepped down, her shoes finding stones slick with rain, and looked up at the entrance. 2 guards flanked the massive oak doors, both armed, both watching her with expressions carved from the same stone as the walls. Miss Whitmore. A woman appeared in the doorway, older, dressed in black with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. I'm Mrs. Kane, the housekeeper. Come inside before you catch your death. Not a warm greeting, but not hostile either. Just factual, like reporting the weather. Elara followed her into a hall that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. High ceilings, dark wood panels, portraits of severe-looking men glaring down from the walls. No fire in the massive hearth, despite the cold. No flowers, no decoration, no softness anywhere. Your rooms are on the 2nd floor, Mrs. Kane said, already climbing the stairs without checking if Elara followed. East wing. Lord Blackthorne's quarters are in the west. You'll have privacy. Privacy. The word hung in the air like a question no one wanted to ask. They walked through corridors lit by lamps that needed more oil, past doors that stayed closed, past windows that showed nothing but rain and darkness. Elara counted her steps, an old habit from childhood, something to focus on when everything else felt overwhelming. 214 steps from the entrance to her door. The room was larger than expected, clean, sparse, a bed that looked sturdy but not comfortable, a wardrobe that smelled of cedar, a writing desk near the window. Someone had tried. There were fresh linens, a vase of dried flowers, a fire already burning in the small hearth. "Dinner is at 8, Mrs. Kane said. "You'll eat in your room tonight. Lord Blackthorn is occupied." "When do I meet him?" Elara asked. "When he's ready." The door closed with a finality that made argument pointless. Elara stood in the center of the room, still wearing her damp traveling cloak, and laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was crying, and she'd promised herself. No tears. Not here. Not where they could be used against her. She changed into dry clothes, unpacked her meager belongings, and tried to read the poetry book. The words slid past without meaning. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling through gaps in the stone like something alive and angry. At 8 exactly, a young maid arrived with a tray. Soup, bread, cheese. Simple food, well prepared. The girl couldn't have been more than 15, all nervous energy and averted eyes. "What's your name?" Elara asked. "Annie, miss." The girl set the tray down like it might explode. "Is there anything else you need?" "Information," Elara said. "About Lord Blackthorn. What's he actually like?" Annie's face went white. I shouldn't. It's a simple question." "There's no simple answer, miss." The girl backed toward the door. "Some say he's fair, some say he's cruel, some say he's cursed. I just work here and try not to get noticed." She fled before Elara could ask anything else. Cursed. That was a new one. The rumors in the capital had centered on violence. Men killed in duels, business rivals who disappeared, a temper that burned hot and left nothing standing. But cursed? That was frontier superstition, the kind of thing people invented when they couldn't explain something. Elara ate the soup, watching the rain streak down her window. Somewhere in this massive, cold house was the man she'd been sold to. The man she was supposed to marry in 3 days, according to the contract her father had signed. The Wolf of the Blacklands. She wondered if he was watching the same storm. Ichit. Sleep didn't come easy in a strange bed. Elara lay awake, listening to the house settle and creak, to footsteps in distant corridors, to voices she couldn't quite hear. Around midnight, she gave up and went to the window. The rain had softened to drizzle. Below, the estate grounds stretched into darkness, barely visible under a sliver of moon breaking through clouds. She could make out the shape of stables, what might be a garden wall, the edge of forest pressing close. Movement caught her eye. A figure crossing the courtyard, tall and moving fast despite the weather. No lantern, no escort, just a man walking like he owned the night. He stopped beneath her window, looked up for just a moment, long enough for her to step back reflexively, then continued toward the west wing. Darius Blackthorn. Had to be. Elara stood in the darkness of her room, heart hammering for no good reason, and wondered what kind of man walked alone through storms at midnight. The kind I'm supposed to marry, she thought. The kind who probably doesn't want this any more than I do. That thought settled something in her chest. Whatever this arrangement was, it wasn't personal. It was business, survival. Her family's debts cleared in exchange for her presence in this cold house. No love, no pretense, no expectations beyond the legal minimum. She could work with that. Morning came gray and reluctant. Elara dressed carefully, choosing the better of her 2 dresses, dark blue wool that had belonged to her aunt, and spent extra time with her hair. Armor of a sort. Look like you belong, and maybe you will. Annie brought breakfast with the same nervous energy as the night before. "Lord Blackthorn wants to see you," she blurted out, setting down the tray hard enough to rattle the teacup. "In the library, 10 o'clock. "Where's the library?" "I'll show you. But, Miss—" Annie twisted her apron between her hands. "Be careful what you say. He doesn't like games." "I don't play games," Elara said. The library was in the south wing, down corridors that grew progressively darker and more austere. Annie left her at the door with a look that bordered on pity, then scurried away like the house was on fire. Elara knocked once, heard a voice say, "Come in," and entered. The library was the first room in Blackthorn Hall that felt lived in. Books lined the walls floor to ceiling, thousands of them, organized with a precision that spoke of regular use. A fire burned hot in the hearth. Maps covered one wall marked with notations in handwriting too small to read from the door. This was someone's sanctuary, their retreat from the cold stone everywhere else. And standing near the window, backlit by weak morning sun, was Darius Blackthorne. He was younger than she expected. Maybe 30, maybe less. Tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested work rather than leisure. Dark hair, darker eyes, a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so carefully blank. He wore simple clothes, no lord's finery, no status symbols, and there was a stillness to him that made her think of predators conserving energy. Miss Whitmore. His voice matched the rest of him, controlled, careful. Sit. It wasn't quite an order, wasn't quite a request. Elara sat in the chair nearest the fire, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, meeting his eyes because looking away felt like surrender. We should establish terms, Darius said, not bothering with pleasantries. Your father's debt is substantial. This marriage clears it completely. You'll have your own quarters, your own household budget, freedom to come and go as you please within reason. In exchange, you attend necessary social functions as my wife, maintain the appearance of a functioning marriage, and don't interfere with my business. That's it? Elara asked. That's it. What about the marriage itself? The physical aspects? Something flickered across his face too fast to identify. Not required, not expected. You're here because your father gambled away more money than he'll earn in 3 lifetimes. I'm here because societal pressure demands a wife. We can both fulfill our obligations without pretending this is anything it's not. Elara studied him, looking for deception, finding only weary honesty. Why do you need a wife? You clearly don't want one. That's not your concern. It is if I'm going to be her. Darius moved to the desk, poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, handed her one without asking if she drank. She took it because refusing felt petty. There are certain advantages to appearing settled, he said. Business partnerships that require respectability. Social obligations that need 2 names on the invitation. And there are people who want me isolated, vulnerable. A wife complicates their plans. So I'm a tactical decision. Yes. At least he was honest. Elara sipped the whiskey, good quality, burned smooth going down, and considered the man across from her. Everything about him radiated control, but she'd grown up around men like her father who used control to hide chaos. She knew the difference between strength and performance. The rumors, she said. Are they true? Which rumors? That you're dangerous, that you've killed men, that you're She paused, choosing words carefully. Unstable. Darius laughed, and the sound was so unexpected it made her flinch. Not warm laughter, not cruel either, just bitter acknowledgement of something absurd. I've killed men, he said, in duels, legally challenged and properly witnessed. I run business operations that make enemies. I inherited a title and lands that came with more problems than profits. Does that make me dangerous? Probably. Unstable? He finished his whiskey in one swallow. You'll have to make that determination yourself. Why did you accept this arrangement? You could have refused my father's offer. I could have. He poured more whiskey, didn't offer her any this time. But I needed a wife quickly, and you needed an escape from whatever disaster your family created. Seemed efficient. Romantic, Elara said dryly. Romance is for people who have the luxury of choice. That landed between them like truth neither wanted to examine. Elara stood, set her glass down carefully on the side table, and met his eyes with something like understanding. 3 days until the ceremony, she said. Any other terms I should know? Don't go into the West Wing without permission. Don't ask the staff about my business. And don't believe everything you hear about me, but don't dismiss it either. That's cryptic. That's honest. He moved to the door, opened it. Clear dismissal. Mrs. Kane will help you prepare for the wedding. If you need anything, ask her. Elara walked toward the door, paused beside him. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, the way his hands stayed loose at his sides like he was ready for violence at any moment. I have one term, she said. What? Don't lie to me. I can handle brutality, danger, whatever darkness you're hiding, but don't lie. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. Agreed, he said. Same terms apply to you. She left the library feeling like she'd just negotiated a treaty rather than met her future husband, which she supposed was exactly what had happened. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like siege planning than wedding planning. Mrs. Kane produced a dress from somewhere, ivory silk that fit surprisingly well after minor alterations. Annie helped with fittings, still nervous, still avoiding questions about Blackthorn. Elara explored the parts of the estate she was allowed to see. The grounds were larger than they appeared from her window, including extensive stables, a practice yard where guards trained, and a walled garden that showed signs of recent neglect. She found the kitchen, where a cook named Margaret ruled with military efficiency and actually smiled when Elara asked about meals. Nice to have someone who asks instead of demands, Margaret said, kneading dough with powerful hands. His lordship barely eats, drives me mad. What does he eat when he does? Simple things, bread, cheese, whatever's quick. Acts like eating's an inconvenience. She shaped the dough into loaves with practiced precision. You'll do him good, I think. Man needs someone to notice when he's running himself into the ground. Elara didn't mention that noticing wasn't in her contract. She saw Darius twice more before the wedding. Once crossing the courtyard while she watched from her window. That same fast, purposeful walk, like standing still, meant vulnerability. Once in the hall outside the library, surrounded by men in business clothes, his voice low and hard as he gave orders that made them pale and nod quickly. He saw her watching that second time, met her eyes for just a moment, then returned to his conversation like she was irrelevant. It should have stung. Instead, it felt like confirmation. They were strangers playing roles, nothing more. The wedding was scheduled for noon on the third day, in the estate's small chapel. Elara expected a crowd, or at least witnesses. She got a magistrate, Mrs. Kane, and 2 guards whose names she didn't know. Darius arrived exactly on time, wearing black that made him look even more severe. No smile, no warmth, just the same controlled blankness he'd shown in the library. He stood beside her, spoke the words the magistrate required, and slid a ring onto her finger without looking at her face. The ring was silver, etched with a pattern she didn't recognize. Not expensive, not cheap, practical. You may kiss the bride, the magistrate said. Darius hesitated, first cracking his armor she'd seen, then pressed a brief formal kiss to her cheek. His lips were warm. His hand on her arm was gentle. Then he stepped back and the moment was over. Congratulations, Mrs. Kane said, sounding like she was reporting a death instead of a marriage. That night, Elara ate dinner alone in her room, wearing her wedding dress because no one had told her to change. The ring caught lamplight when she moved her hand, throwing small shadows on the walls. She was Lady Blackthorn now, wife to a man she didn't know, living in a house that felt like a prison pretending to be a home. Outside, wind rattled the windows. She thought about her family in the capital, her father probably drunk by now, her mother pretending everything was fine, her younger sister who'd cried when Elara left. The debt was cleared. They'd survive. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. A knock at the door surprised her. Mrs. Kane entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tray with tea and something wrapped in cloth. From his lordship, she said, setting it down. Said you might want it. Elara unwrapped the cloth. A book. Poetry, leather-bound, newer than anything she'd ever owned. Inside the cover, written in handwriting she recognized from the library maps, since you didn't finish the other one. D. Not warmth, exactly, but acknowledgement. He'd noticed her unpacking, seen the worn poetry book, remembered. Thank you, Elara said to Mrs. Kane. Don't thank me, I'm just the messenger. But the housekeeper's face had softened fractionally. He's not good at people, never learned how, but he's not cruel. Remember that when things get difficult. When, not if. This is Blackthorn Hall, my lady. Difficult is a permanent resident. Mrs. Kane left. Elara opened the book to a random page, found a poem about storms and shelter, and wondered if he'd chosen it deliberately or if it was just coincidence. Probably coincidence. Darius Blackthorn didn't seem like a man who dealt in metaphors. She read until the fire burned low and her eyes grew heavy, then changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. The sheets were cold. The house was quiet. And somewhere in the West Wing, her husband was probably still awake, working or planning or doing whatever it was that kept him moving through midnight storms. Elara closed her eyes and tried to sleep, tried not to think about the years stretching ahead, tried to convince herself this was survivable. The scream woke her. Not close, but loud enough to carry through stone and wood, raw, agonized, the sound of someone in pain or terror. Elara sat up, heart hammering, listening. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath. She got out of bed, grabbed a shawl, cracked open her door. The corridor was empty, dark except for a single lamp burning at the far end. No guards, no servants, no explanation. Another scream, quieter this time, coming from the West Wing. Darius had said not to go there, but that sound, no one made that sound unless something was seriously wrong. Elara stepped into the corridor, bare feet silent on cold stone. She counted doors as she passed them, watching for movement, ready to retreat at the first sign of trouble. The West Wing entrance was locked, but the lock was old and the mechanism simple. Her father had taught her to pick locks when she was 10, useful skill when creditors came calling. 30 seconds, and she was through. The West Wing corridors were darker, narrower, more obviously lived in. She followed the sound of labored breathing to a room at the end of the hall, darker half open, firelight spilling into darkness. Darius was on his knees beside the bed, head down, hands gripping the mattress like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Sweat soaked his shirt. His breathing came in gasps that sounded like drowning. "Darius?" Elara said quietly. He spun toward her so fast she stepped back, and for just a second his eyes were wild, not seeing her, seeing something else, something that made him dangerous. Then recognition cut through whatever held him, and he sagged. "I told you," he said, voice raw, "not the West Wing. I heard you screaming. Nightmare, just a nightmare, just a..." He pushed to his feet, unsteady, and she saw the tremor in his hands before he clenched them into fists. "Go back to your room. You're shaking. I said go!" But Elara had grown up navigating her father's moods, reading the space between anger and desperation. This wasn't rage. This was shame. She crossed the room slowly, giving him time to object, and picked up a water pitcher from the bedside table, poured a glass, handed it to him. He took it because refusing would have meant acknowledging what she'd seen. "How often?" she asked. "Not your concern. I'm your wife. Technically, everything about you is my concern." Darius laughed, that same bitter sound from the library. "Tactical wife. Contract wife. Not the kind who sees this." "Too late. I already did." Elara sat on the edge of the bed, ignoring his obvious discomfort. "The rumors say you're violent, unstable. But this looks like trauma, not instability. What happened to you?" He turned away, stared into the fire. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My father," he said quietly. "Before he died, he had methods for teaching lessons. The nightmares are old memories that don't stay buried. Simple words, but they landed heavy." Elara thought about the scars she'd glimpsed, the constant vigilance, the way he moved like violence was always one breath away. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. He's dead. I survived. That's enough." But it clearly wasn't, or he wouldn't wake up screaming. Elara stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "The book you sent," she said. "Thank you. It was thoughtful." "I'm not thoughtful. I saw you had one and assumed you'd want another." "Still counts as thoughtful." She left before he could argue, returned to her room, climbed back into bed. But sleep felt impossible now. She kept hearing that scream, kept seeing him on his knees, kept thinking about what kind of father left scars deep enough to follow his son into dreams. The Wolf of the Blacklands, she thought. Maybe that name wasn't about what he'd done to others. Maybe it was about what had been done to him. She didn't mention the nightmares. Morning came with frost on the windows and an awkward breakfast neither of them acknowledged. Darius appeared in the dining room looking exactly as controlled as before. No evidence of the man she'd found on his knees, no reference to her midnight intrusion. He ate quickly, barely tasting his food, and left without a word. Elara watched him go and decided silence worked both ways. The routine established itself over the following week. They lived in the same house like strangers sharing a train car. Polite distance, minimal conversation, careful avoidance of anything personal. He worked constantly, meetings with stewards and merchants and men whose expensive clothes couldn't hide their nervous energy around him. She explored the estate, learned the staff's names, tried to find her place in a household that ran fine without her. Mrs. Kane became her reluctant guide. "The East Gardens need attention," the housekeeper said one morning, leading Elara through corridors she hadn't seen yet. "They were Lady Catherine's pride before she passed. Lord Blackthorn's mother," she added, seeing Elara's confusion, "died when he was 14. The gardens died with her." They emerged into what must have been beautiful once: stone pathways, raised beds for herbs and flowers, a fountain in the center that had run dry. Now it was overgrown chaos, weeds choking everything, sculptures covered in moss. "Why doesn't he restore it?" Elara asked. "Too many memories. Some good, most not." Mrs. Kane's expression softened into something almost fond. "His mother loved this place. His father destroyed it after she died. Symbolic, he called it. Cruel is what it was." Elara walked the pathways, imagining what it had looked like when someone cared. She found remnants of that care, rosemary still growing wild, lavender fighting through the weeds, a sundial whose inscription was barely visible. "Time wounds all things, but gardens heal." "Can I work on it?" she asked. Mrs. Kane looked startled. "The garden? Why would you want to?" "Because I need something to do besides sit in my room reading poetry, and because—" Elara paused, choosing honesty. "Because it deserves better than this. His lordship won't like it. His lordship doesn't have to know until it's done." That earned her the first real smile she'd seen from the housekeeper. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. All right, I'll have tools brought round, but if he objects, this was your idea." Elara started the next morning. The work was harder than she expected. Years of neglect didn't surrender easily. Her hands blistered, her back ached, dirt embedded itself under her fingernails no matter how much she scrubbed. But there was satisfaction in clearing away the dead to find what still lived underneath. Annie brought lunch to the garden on the third day, eyes wide at the progress. "You're really doing it," the girl said, setting down bread and cheese on a stone bench Elara had uncovered. "Mrs. Kane said you would, but I didn't believe her." "Why not?" "Because most ladies don't—" Annie caught herself, flushed. "I mean, ladies of your station. They don't usually dig in dirt." "I'm not like most ladies." Elara wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of mud. "And I need the distraction." "From what?" "From thinking too much about where I am and why I'm here." Annie sat on the bench, watching Elara work. After a moment, "Is it true you picked the lock to get into the West Wing?" "Who told you that?" "Thomas. He's one of the guards. Said he found the lock tampered with and you were the only one who'd been in that corridor." The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "Did you really? Did you see him?" Elara stopped digging. "See who?" "Lord Blackthorn. When the nightmares come." Annie twisted her apron. "We all know. The screaming. It's been happening since his father died. Some nights worse than others. We pretend we don't hear, but how did his father die?" Elara asked quietly. "Accident. That's the official story. Fell from his horse during a hunt, broke his neck." Annie's eyes said she didn't believe it. But the timing was suspicious. Right after the worst fight anyone had ever heard them have. Shouting that shook the windows. And then the old lord's dead, and Darius inherits everything. "You think Darius killed him?" "I think the old lord was a monster who made his son's life torture. And I think however he died, the world's better without him." Annie stood, picking up the empty tray. "But others aren't so charitable. There are people in town who call Lord Blackthorn a murderer, who say he's dangerous, unstable, that the violence runs in his blood. That's why he can't find a wife through normal channels. Why your father's offer was the only one he'd received in years." The information settled into place like puzzle pieces Elara hadn't known she was collecting. The isolation, the reputation, the defensive walls around everything Darius said and did. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Just be careful, my lady. People are watching how this marriage goes, and there are some who want it to fail." Annie left. Elara returned to her work, but the conversation nagged at her. She'd assumed Darius's reputation was exaggerated gossip. Now she wasn't sure. Either he was exactly what they said, violent, dangerous, possibly a patricide, or he was a damaged man carrying blame for sins he didn't commit. She needed to know which. That night, she found him in the library. He sat at his desk, surrounded by ledgers and maps, a bottle of whiskey within reach but barely touched. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before the mask returned. "Need something?" he asked. "Information." Elara closed the door behind her. "About your father's death." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That's not your concern," Darius said carefully. "People think you killed him. That makes it my concern, since I'm now associated with you." She moved closer, watching him tense. "Did you? What if I did?" "Then I'd ask why, and I'd probably understand." That surprised him. She saw it in the way his hand stilled on the papers, the way he actually looked at her instead of through her. "You'd understand murder?" "I'd understand survival. There's a difference." Elara sat in the chair across from him, the same one from their first meeting. "Your father hurt you. The nightmares, the scars, the way you move like you're expecting attack, that doesn't come from nothing. So either you killed him in self-defense or someone else did you a favor. Either way, I'm not going to judge you for it." Darius studied her for a long moment. Then he poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the desk. "I didn't kill him," he said, "though I'd thought about it enough times that I'm probably guilty anyway. He fell from his horse during a hunt. Witnesses confirmed it. But the timing was convenient, and I didn't mourn him, so people drew their own conclusions." "What kind of man was he?" "The kind who thought fear and pain were teaching tools, who believed weakness was a sin that needed to be beaten out." Darius drank, grimaced. "He was worse to my mother. She died of a fever, officially. Unofficially, she gave up. Being married to Thomas Blackthorne was a slow execution." "I'm sorry." "Stop saying that. Sorry doesn't fix anything." "No," Elara agreed. "Must. But acknowledging harm matters. My father wasn't violent, just weak. He gambled everything away and then sold me to cover his debts. Different kind of damage, same result. Children paying for their parents' failures." Something shifted in Darius's expression. Not quite warmth, but recognition. "Is that why you're here?" "Actually here. In this room, asking questions instead of hiding in your wing. I'm here because I don't like uncertainty, and because if we're going to live in this arrangement for years, I'd rather know who I'm living with." "Fair enough." He refilled both glasses. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with why people are so afraid of you." So he told her about inheriting the estate at 22 with massive debts and enemies his father had made through cruelty and bad business. About the duels he'd fought to defend the family name, the men he'd faced and beaten because refusing meant surrendering everything. About the ruthless efficiency he'd employed to turn the failing estate profitable again, deals that made rivals nervous, decisions that earned respect and resentment in equal measure. "I'm good at strategy," he said, "at reading people, at knowing where to push and when to pull back. That makes me useful, and useful makes me threatening. So they call me dangerous, unstable, whatever label keeps me at a distance. And I let them, because distance means safety." "Lonely safety," Elara observed. "Better than the alternative." They talked until the fire burned low and the whiskey bottle sat empty between them. Elara learned about the business operations he'd built, the investments that sustained the estate, the careful balance between frontier rough justice and societal expectations. Darius asked about her family, her childhood, what she'd given up to come here. "Freedom," she said honestly. "The illusion of choice. Though I suppose I never had much of either. Just different cages with prettier bars." "And this cage? How are you finding it?" "Cold, quiet, better than expected." She stood, steadied herself against the desk. The whiskey had hit harder than she'd realized. "I'm restoring the East Gardens. Thought you should know." Darius went very still. "Why?" "Because they deserve it. Because your mother loved them and your father destroyed them, and neither of those men get to decide what happens now." She met his eyes. If you object, tell me. Otherwise, I'm continuing. I don't object. His voice had gone rough. But don't do it for me. Those gardens, there's history there. Bad history. History isn't the same as destiny. What happened doesn't have to dictate what comes next. Elara moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. The nightmares. Do they come every night? Most nights. The door between our wings, does it lock from your side? Yes. Then unlock it. If you need help, I'll hear you sooner. She left before he could argue, before she could second-guess the offer, before the whiskey courage faded into morning regret. But the next night, when the screaming woke her, the door between their wings was unlocked. Elara found him faster this time, prepared for what she'd see. He was sitting on the floor, back against the bed, head in his hands, still shaking, still caught in whatever memory held him, but conscious enough to know she was there. She didn't ask permission, just sat beside him on the cold floor and waited. You don't have to do this, Darius said without looking up. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? Because nobody should wake up alone like that. She kept her voice level, factual. My sister used to have nightmares after our mother got sick. I'd sit with her until they passed. It helps, having someone there. Even if they can't fix it. They sat in silence until his breathing steadied and the tremors faded. Then he stood, helped her up with a hand that was steadier than it should have been, and walked her to the door. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. I'm a terrible night guard. I fall asleep easy. That earned her an almost smile. I'll manage. But it became routine anyway. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, she'd wake to sounds of distress and make the walk to his room. Sometimes he'd already be awake and pacing, trying to outrun the memories. Sometimes she'd find him mid-nightmare and have to wake him carefully. He came out of them swinging, pure instinct. She learned to stay out of reach, to use her voice instead of touch, to wait for recognition before moving closer. They didn't talk about it during the day. That was the unspoken agreement. Night terrors existed in darkness. Daylight was for pretending everything was normal. The gardens progressed. Elara worked until her hands bled, until her back screamed protest, until Mrs. Kane insisted she rest before she collapsed. The satisfaction was worth the pain, watching life emerge from death, watching order replace chaos. She found bulbs that still bloomed under the weeds, herbs that had survived through sheer stubbornness, the bones of something beautiful waiting to be remembered. Darius never visited while she worked. But one morning she found new tools on the stone bench, good quality, perfectly maintained, exactly what she needed. No note, no explanation, just acknowledgement. 2 weeks into her garden project, the first visitor arrived. Elara was elbow-deep in dirt when Mrs. Kane appeared, moving faster than usual, face tight with concern. My lady, there's a gentleman here to see Lord Blackthorn. Marcus Crow, he's trouble, frankly. Thought you should know. Why would I need to know? Because he's asking about you, about the marriage, about whether it's legitimate. Mrs. Kane wrung her hands. He's one of the men who wants Lord Blackthorn's business contracts, wants him isolated and vulnerable. A successful marriage complicates that. Elara stood, brushed dirt from her dress. Where is he? Main parlor. But my lady, you don't have to. Yes, I do. If this is my role, I need to play it. She'd never used the main parlor. It was formal, cold, designed for exactly this kind of performance. Marcus Crow stood near the windows, middle-aged, expensively dressed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He turned when she entered, eyes assessing her with insulting thoroughness. Lady Blackthorn, he said, the title sounding like mockery. Finally, I was beginning to think you were a fiction. Mr. Crow, Elara kept her voice level, my husband is occupied. Perhaps I can help you. Can you? That depends on whether you're actually his wife or just a convenient story. He moved closer, deliberate invasion of space. You see, I've heard interesting things. About a rushed wedding, about a marriage of convenience, about a desperate lord buying respectability with a desperate woman's cooperation. Then you've heard wrong. Have I? Because it seems to me that a real wife would be treated better than this. Shoved in a cold wing, ignored by her husband, left to dig in gardens like a common servant. Crow smiled. Unless, of course, she's not a real wife at all. Unless this is just theater. Elara felt rage build. Not at the insult to herself, but at the calculation behind it. This man wanted ammunition, wanted proof the marriage was fake, so he could use it against Darius. Every word was a test, every observation a weapon in waiting. "Mr. Crow," she said carefully, "I don't know what business you have with my husband, and frankly I don't care. But I'll make something very clear. This marriage is legal, legitimate, and none of your concern. If you have issues with Lord Blackthorn's business practices, take them up with him. Leave me out of it." "Or what? You'll tell him I insulted you?" Crow laughed. "Does he even care enough to object?" The door opened. Darius stood in the frame, and everything about his posture screamed danger. He must have been nearby, must have heard at least part of the conversation. "Crow," he said quietly, "you have 10 seconds to leave my house before I remove you personally." "Blackthorn, I was just meeting your lovely wife, making sure she's being treated well." Crow's smile was all teeth. "She seems a bit neglected. Living separately, working like a servant, makes one wonder about the nature of your arrangement." Darius moved into the room with predatory grace. 5 seconds. "I'm simply concerned for her welfare. A woman sold into marriage to clear debts, isolated in a remote estate with a man known for violence. Anyone would worry." 3. Elara watched calculation flicker across Crow's face. He was pushing, testing limits, trying to provoke a reaction he could use later. And Darius was giving him exactly what he wanted: visible anger, threat of violence, proof of instability. She stepped between them before the count reached 0. "Mr. Crow," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "you're mistaking rural life for mistreatment and preference for neglect. I work in the gardens because I choose to. I live in my own wing because I prefer privacy. And my husband respects those choices because he's not the controlling monster you're hoping to expose." She moved closer to Crow, invading his space the way he'd invaded hers. "Now, I've been polite. I've answered your concerns, but my patience has limits and you've reached them. Leave." Crow's eyes shifted between them, recalculating. "Of course, Lady Blackthorn. My apologies if I've caused offense." He nodded to Darius. "We'll speak another time. About the contracts." "No," Darius said flatly. "We won't. Consider our business concluded." After Crow left, silence filled the parlor like smoke. Elara felt adrenaline crash through her, hands starting to shake now that the performance was over. She'd just made an enemy for both of them, shown her hand, proven she'd defend Darius even when she barely knew him. Stupid. Tactical disaster. Emotional reaction when cold logic was required. "That was foolish," Darius said. "I know. He'll use this. Spread rumors that you're lying to protect me, that I've manipulated you or threatened you into compliance. Let him." "Elara, let him," she repeated, turning to face him. "Because here's what he saw. A wife defending her husband. Not a contracted employee, not a desperate woman playing a role. And that uncertainty, that's worse for him than any denial. Now he doesn't know what we are, which means he can't predict what we'll do." Darius stared at her like she'd just revealed a hand of cards he hadn't known she was holding. "You did that deliberately." "Yes." "Why? This isn't your fight. You could have stayed neutral. Let me handle it." "Because neutral means vulnerable. And because—" Elara paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Because whatever this arrangement is, we're in it together. That means protecting each other when threats come calling." Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe gratitude, something else she couldn't name. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar control. "Crow won't stop," he said. "He'll dig, spread rumors, try to find cracks. This just made you a target. Then I'll deal with it when it comes." "You don't know what you're risking." "Neither do you." Elara moved toward the door, tired suddenly, drained from the confrontation. "But we'll figure it out. That's what people do when they're stuck together. They figure it out or they drown." She spent the rest of the day in the garden, working until her muscles screamed and her mind quieted. But the encounter with Crow had shaken something loose. She wasn't just a placeholder wife anymore. She'd chosen a side, drawn a line, made herself part of whatever war Darius was fighting. and she had no idea if that made her brave or stupid. That night, the nightmare came worse than usual. Elara woke to the sound of breaking glass and found Darius in his room, bleeding from a cut on his hand, surrounded by shards of the mirror he'd apparently punched. He was still caught in whatever memory held him, eyes unfocused, breathing ragged. "Darius?" She stayed in the doorway, kept her voice calm. "It's Elara. You're safe. You're in your room at Blackthorn Hall. Whatever you're seeing isn't real anymore." He focused on her slowly, recognition cutting through terror, looked down at his bleeding hand like he didn't know how it had happened. "I'll get bandages," Elara said. "Don't." His voice came out raw. "Just don't. I'll handle it. You're bleeding all over the floor." "I said I'll handle it." But he didn't move, just stood there shaking, and Elara made a decision. She crossed to the washstand, found clean cloth, brought it back and wrapped his hand with efficient movement she'd learned nursing her sick mother. He didn't protest, didn't pull away, just watched her work with an expression she couldn't read. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "My father. The last time he—" Darius cut himself off. "Doesn't matter. It's over. Doesn't seem over if you're punching mirrors." "I wasn't fully awake." Elara finished wrapping his hand, tied off the cloth. The bleeding was slowing, but the cuts were deep. He'd need proper medical attention if he didn't want scarring. "Crow's visit triggered this," she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Probably. Men like him, they remind me of my father. The way they calculate, the way they see people as obstacles or tools, it brings things back. I'm sorry I made it worse, confronting him like that. You didn't make it worse. You made it different. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted. No one's defended me in a long time. I forgot what that felt like. What does it feel like? Dangerous. Like caring. Like something I can't afford. Elara sat beside him, not touching, just present. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The broken mirror caught lamplight, throwing fractured reflections across the walls. "I talked to Annie," she said, "about your father's death, about the rumors. And I don't care if you killed him or not. I care about who you are now, not what you might have done then." "You should care. It matters. Only if you're planning to kill anyone else." "I'm not." "Then it doesn't matter." Darius turned to look at her, really look at her, and something in his expression cracked. Not breaking, just opening. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Elara admitted. "But I'm here, and you're stuck with me, so we might as well make the best of it." They sat in silence while the night deepened and the fire burned down to coals. Eventually, Elara stood, moved toward the door. "Leave the mirror," she said. "I'll have it cleaned up in the morning. And Darius, lock your door if you don't want me coming in. Otherwise, I'll keep coming." "I know." She left him there, returned to her room, and lay awake wondering what she'd gotten herself into. This was supposed to be simple, a contract, an arrangement, mutual survival. But nothing about Darius Blackthorn was simple, and she was starting to realize that nothing about her feelings toward him was either. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. Darius's handwriting, brief and direct. "Thank you. For last night. For Crow. For the gardens." Dee's small acknowledgement, but it mattered. Elara tucked the note into her book of poetry and went to check on the East Gardens. The rosemary had bloomed. The bloom lasted 3 days before the first threat arrived. Elara was trimming dead growth from the lavender when Thomas, the guard who'd noticed her lockpicking, appeared at the garden gate. His face was grim. "Lady Blackthorn, you need to come inside, now." "What's happened?" "Just come, please." She followed him through corridors that seemed darker than usual, past servants who wouldn't meet her eyes, into the main hall where Darius stood rigid as stone. 3 men faced him, well-dressed, official-looking, and radiating authority that made her stomach clench. The man in the center held a document stamped with a seal she didn't recognize. "Lord Blackthorn," he said, voice carrying the weight of pronouncement. "You are hereby summoned to answer charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit violence against Marcus Crow. The evidence has been submitted to the magistrate. You have 3 days to prepare your defense." Elara felt the words land like physical blows. Murder. Fraud. This wasn't just business rivalry anymore. On what grounds? Darius asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Crow has provided testimony and witnesses stating that you threatened his life following his visit to this estate. Furthermore, he has evidence suggesting your involvement in your father's death was not accidental, and that you manipulated the investigation through bribery and intimidation. The official consulted his papers. There are also allegations regarding your marriage, that it's a fraudulent arrangement designed to present false respectability while you conduct illegal business operations. That's insane, Elara said before she could stop herself. He's lying. The official barely glanced at her. Are you Lady Blackthorn? Yes. Then you'll also be called to testify about the nature of your marriage, the circumstances of your arrangement, and whether you've been coerced or threatened into compliance. The room tilted. They were coming for both of them now, not just Darius's reputation, but hers. The legitimacy of everything they'd built, fragile as it was. This is Crow's doing, Darius said. Retaliation for refusing his business terms. Perhaps, but the magistrate takes these allegations seriously. 3 days, Lord Blackthorn. Present yourself at the courthouse or a warrant will be issued for your arrest. They left. The silence they left behind felt suffocating. Darius stood motionless, staring at nothing, and Elara recognized the look. He was calculating, running scenarios, searching for strategy in chaos. She'd seen her father do the same thing before admitting defeat. How bad is this? She asked. Bad. He moved to the window, hands gripping the frame. Crow's smart. He's bundling real crimes, or what can be made to look like real crimes, with fabricated ones. Makes it harder to defend. Even if we disprove the murder charge, the fraud allegations stick. And if the marriage is declared invalid, your contracts collapse. Your credibility disappears. He gets what he wants. Yes. Mrs. Kane appeared in the doorway, face pale. My lord, there are riders coming from town. Word is spreading fast. People are saying... She stopped, couldn't finish. Saying what? Elara demanded. That you killed a man. That you've been operating a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate business. That your wife is either complicit or a victim. Mrs. Kane's voice broke. They're calling for your arrest. Some are calling for worse. Darius turned from the window, and for the first time since Elara met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Not of the charges, of what they meant, what they'd unleash. Get everyone inside, he told Thomas. Lock the gates. No one enters without my permission. We're under siege, Elara said after Thomas left. Effective siege. Crow doesn't need violence when rumor does the work for him. Darius paced, agitation breaking through his usual control. He's been planning this. The visit, the provocation, making sure witnesses saw him leave peacefully. Now he claims I threatened him after, and who's going to believe the dangerous frontier lord over the respectable businessman? People who know you. I don't have people who know me. I have employees, business associates, and enemies. That's not the same as allies. Elara watched him spiral, saw the walls he'd built starting to crack under pressure. This was what Crow wanted, to isolate him, push him into defensive panic, make him look unstable. And it was working. Stop, she said. Darius kept pacing. Darius, stop. She stepped into his path, forcing him to acknowledge her. This is what he wants. You falling apart, making rash decisions, proving you're the violent, unstable man everyone thinks you are. Don't give him that. What would you have me do? The charges are public. Even if I'm acquitted, the damage is done. No one will do business with a suspected murderer. Then we don't just defend. We attack. Elara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. Crow is using your past against you, so we use his. Men like him don't rise to power without making enemies, cutting corners, doing things they'd rather keep hidden. We find those things. We make him defend himself instead of attacking you. That takes time we don't have. Then we buy time. We give the magistrate reason to delay, to investigate further, and we start with the easiest charge to disprove, the marriage fraud. Darius looked at her like she'd suggested flying. How do we prove a marriage is real when it's not? By making it real enough that no one can argue otherwise. Elara felt her heart hammering but kept her voice steady. You said people are watching, so we show them a marriage that looks legitimate. Public appearances, witnesses, evidence of a functioning partnership. We make Crow's allegations look ridiculous. That's performance. It won't hold up under scrutiny. Everything is performance if you look hard enough. The question is whether we're convincing. She moved closer, lowering her voice. I defended you to Crow. That's documented. I live here, work here, have been seen by staff and visitors. We build on that. Show a progression from arrangement to actual partnership. It doesn't have to be love, just believable enough to create doubt. Darius studied her, and she could see him running calculations, weighing risks. If this fails, you're implicated too. Your reputation destroyed along with mine. My reputation was destroyed the moment my father sold me to clear his debts. At least this way I'm choosing the fight. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of matching desperation. All right, we do it your way, but we need more than performance. We need evidence, testimony, something concrete. Then we get it, starting now. They spent the afternoon in the library, planning like generals before battle. Elara sent for Mrs. Kane, Annie, Margaret the cook, anyone who'd witnessed their daily lives. Darius wrote to business associates requesting statements about the marriage, about Elara's presence at estate functions, anything that established legitimacy. The nightmares, Elara said, pausing over a list of potential witnesses. The servants know. They've heard you, seen me going to your room. That's evidence we share quarters, that the marriage is, that makes me look unstable, plays into Crow's narrative. Or it makes you human. A man struggling with trauma, supported by his wife, that's sympathetic, not suspicious. Darius looked uncomfortable. I don't want that exposed. I know, but we might not have a choice. Elara set down her pen, met his eyes. This is going to get invasive. They're going to ask questions about our private life, our relationship, things we've kept carefully separated. You need to decide now how much you're willing to reveal. Nothing. I'm willing to reveal nothing. That's not an option anymore. Crow made sure of that. They sat in tense silence, the weight of what she was proposing settling between them. Privacy had been their agreement. Separate lives, minimal interference, careful boundaries. Now she was suggesting they tear all of that down for public consumption. I'll do what's necessary, Darius said finally. But I won't lie about things that can be verified. If they ask about the arrangement, about why you're here, I'll tell the truth. The truth makes you look like a man who bought a wife. Better than a man who lies about it. Fair point. Elara returned to her list, adding notes, crossing out ideas that wouldn't work. Outside, afternoon faded into evening. Neither of them moved to light more lamps. There's something else, Darius said quietly, about my father's death. Crow's investigators will dig into it. They'll find inconsistencies in the official story because there are inconsistencies. Elara set down her pen. Tell me. The fall from his horse, that part's true. What's not in the official report is that we'd fought that morning, violently. He came at me with a riding crop, same way he'd done 100 times before. But I was bigger by then, stronger. I fought back. Darius's voice had gone flat, reciting facts without emotion. He fell, hit his head. When he went riding later, he was already injured, already unsteady. The fall finished what I'd started. Did you know? That he was hurt badly enough to fall? I suspected. I didn't stop him from riding. That's not murder. It's close enough for a good prosecutor. Self-defense only works if you can prove immediate threat. Hours later? That's negligence at best, manslaughter at worst. Elara absorbed this, turning it over, looking for angles. Who else knows? The doctor who examined him before the ride. He noted the head injury, recommended rest. My father ignored him and went hunting anyway. The doctor's statement is in the records but buried. Crow's people will find it. Then we find the doctor first. Get his testimony on record. Make it clear your father ignored medical advice, that his own actions caused his death. The doctor's dead, died 2 years ago. Medical records survive. We get those, we get the context. Elara made notes. What else? What other inconsistencies will they find? Darius told her. about the investigation that had been superficial at best, about officials who'd been relieved to declare it an accident and close the case, about witnesses who'd heard the morning fight but conveniently forgot when questioned. Every detail another potential weapon in Crow's hands. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen and Elara's hand cramped from writing. The list of vulnerabilities was long. The list of defenses was shorter. "This might not work," Darius said, staring at her notes. "Probably won't. But sitting here waiting for Crow to destroy you definitely won't work." Elara stood, stretched muscles stiff from sitting. "We fight. Even if we lose, we make it cost him something." "Why are you doing this? You could walk away, claim coercion, say I manipulated you. Crow would probably leave you alone." The question hung in the air between them. Elara could lie, give him a strategic answer about protecting her own interests. But they'd promised honesty to each other, and she'd meant it. "Because you don't deserve this," she said. "You're not a good man, you're ruthless, controlling, and you make terrible decisions about when to show emotion. But you're not a murderer. You're not the monster they're making you out to be. And I'm tired of watching innocent people get destroyed by powerful men who lie." Darius looked at her like she'd just revealed something fundamental he hadn't known was there. "I'm not innocent. None of us are. But there's a difference between surviving and predating. You survived. Crow's a predator. I know which side I'm on." He stood, moved around the desk, stopped close enough that she could see exhaustion carved into his face. "If we do this, if we make this marriage look real, there are lines we'll have to cross. Public affection, private testimony, things that blur the boundaries we set." "I know. And you're willing?" Elara thought about the garden she'd restored, about the nightmares she'd witnessed, about the note he'd slipped under her door, about the fragile trust they'd built in stolen conversations and midnight confessions. It wasn't love, but it was something worth protecting. "I'm willing," she said. The next morning, they began their campaign. First stop was the town, where rumors had already taken root like poison. Elara dressed carefully, the blue wool dress, her grandmother's hairbrush working through her hair until it shone. The silver ring Darius had given her polished until it caught light. She looked like a lady. She needed to act like one. They rode together in the carriage, closer than necessary, his hand resting on the seat between them where anyone looking in would see. The contact felt strange, but not unpleasant. Darius had cleaned up too, proper lord's clothing, his hair cut, the wild edge contained behind respectability. "Ready?" he asked as the carriage slowed. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The market square was crowded. Conversation stopped when they stepped out, eyes tracking their movement with undisguised curiosity. Elara took Darius's offered arm, kept her chin up, and walked like she had every right to be there. They visited the butcher first. Margaret had sent a list of orders, practical reason for the visit, nothing suspicious. The butcher's wife served them, hands shaking slightly as she wrapped their purchases. "Terrible business," she said quietly. "The accusations. Nobody here believes them, my lord. We know you're a fair man." "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan." Darius's voice was controlled, but Elara felt tension in his arm. "I appreciate that. And congratulations on your marriage. It's good to see you settled. Your mother would have been pleased." That hit something. Darius's grip tightened fractionally on Elara's arm before he relaxed it. "She would have. Lady Blackthorn has been—" He paused, and Elara jumped in smoothly. "He's been very patient with me. Estate life is an adjustment, but I'm finding my place. The gardens, we've heard. Old Mary's daughter works at the hall, says you've brought them back beautiful." Small talk, but it mattered. Each conversation was a stone in their defense. Witnesses who'd seen them together, who believed the marriage, who'd testify if needed. They made 6 more stops: the general store, the seamstress, the blacksmith, the church where they'd been married. At each location, Elara played her role: attentive wife, curious newcomer, woman clearly invested in her husband's world. And Darius matched her, his hand at her back, his attention on her when she spoke, small gestures that read as genuine affection to anyone watching. It was exhausting. By the time they returned to the carriage, Elara felt wrung out from performance. But they'd accomplished something, planted doubt in the rumors, shown a united front, made Crow's allegations seem less credible. You're good at this, Darius said as they rode back. At what? Lying? At making people believe what they see. That's not lying, that's understanding what they want to see and giving it to them. My father taught me. He was excellent at making people believe things that weren't true, usually right before asking them for money. This is different, is it? Elara looked at him directly. We're performing a marriage that isn't real to convince people we're something we're not. How is that different from my father's cons? Because we're not taking anything from them. We're just protecting ourselves. Semantics, but I'll take it. They rode in silence for a while. Then Darius said, "Back there, at the butcher's, when Mrs. Brennan mentioned my mother, thank you for stepping in." I froze. I noticed. She was a vulnerable spot. Crow will exploit that if he can. Probably already is. Darius stared out the window at passing fields. My mother loved the town, knew everyone, helped everyone. When she died, half the people at the funeral were strangers to me, people she'd aided or befriended that I'd never met. My father hated it, called her weak for caring. She sounds strong to me. Takes courage to care when everyone around you is teaching you not to. She was strong, stronger than I gave her credit for. He turned back to Elara. The gardens. I should have said this before. Thank you for bringing them back. She would have. It matters. The admission cost him something. Elara saw it in the way he looked away immediately, back to the window, walls going up again. But the crack had been there, just for a moment. Tell me about her, she said. About what she was like before everything went wrong. So he did. Haltingly at first, then with more ease as memories surfaced. About a woman who'd read to him every night, who'd taught him about plants and stars, who'd stood between him and his father's rage until she couldn't anymore. About her final years retreating into silence and gardens, surviving in the only way she knew how. By the time they reached Blackthorn Hall, Elara understood something new about the man beside her. He wasn't just defending himself against Crow's accusations. He was defending the memory of the only person who'd ever protected him. That night brought no nightmares. Darius slept soundly for the first time in weeks, or maybe he just didn't wake her when they came. Elara lay awake instead, mind racing through scenarios, strategies, ways this could go right or catastrophically wrong. The second day brought news that made everything worse. Thomas delivered the message at breakfast, his face grim. Crow's filed additional charges, claims you've been conducting illegal trade operations, falsifying records, bribing officials. And he's got witnesses, merchants willing to testify you threatened them into exclusive contracts. Let me see. Darius took the document, read it with a face carved from stone. Then he threw it across the room hard enough to scatter pages everywhere. He's got half the merchants in the territory on his list. Some of them I've never even met. He's buying testimony, Elara said. Of course he is. And we can't prove it without investigating every witness, which takes time we don't have. Then we focus on what we can prove, the marriage legitimacy. If we establish that conclusively, it undermines his fraud narrative, makes the other charges look like desperate escalation. Darius paced that dangerous energy back. The hearing is tomorrow. We're out of time. Then we use what we have. The town visits, the staff testimony, the medical records from your father's death. We build the best case we can and hope the magistrate sees through Crow's strategy. And if he doesn't, then we lose everything and figure out what comes next. The bluntness stopped Darius mid-pace. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression broke. You shouldn't be here. This isn't your fight. I never should have agreed to this arrangement. Too late. I'm here and I'm staying. Elara stood cross to him. Stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. We're stronger together than apart. That's the whole point. You don't know what you're risking. I know exactly what I'm risking. Same thing you are. Everything. She reached out, took his hand, the one still bandaged from punching the mirror. We do this together or we don't do it at all. His fingers closed around hers, gripped tight enough to hurt. I don't know how to do together. I've only ever known alone. Then learn, starting now. They spent the rest of the day preparing testimony, rehearsing answers, planning for every scenario they could imagine. Mrs. Kane brought statements from staff, detailed accounts of Elara's daily life, her work in the gardens, her presence at estate functions. Margaret added testimony about meals prepared for two, about seeing them together, about the small domestic details that suggested genuine partnership. Annie provided the most damaging evidence for their case, testimony about the nightmares, about seeing Elara go to Darius's room, about witnessing what looked like intimate care between spouses. It was invasive, uncomfortable, exactly what they needed. "I'm sorry," Annie said, handing over her written statement. "I know this is private, but Mrs. Kane said it could help." "It does," Elara assured her. "Thank you for being honest." By evening, they had a case. Fragile, built on performance and hope, but a case nonetheless. Elara found Darius alone in the library later, staring at the fire. She sat beside him without asking permission. "Tomorrow," she said, "whatever happens, we face it together." Together. He tested the word like it was foreign. "I'm not good at that." "Neither am I. But we'll figure it out." They sat in silence, watching flames consume wood, both knowing tomorrow would either save them or destroy everything they'd built. The weight of it pressed down like physical force. "There's something I need to tell you," Darius said finally, "about why I really accepted your father's offer, why I needed a wife so urgently." Elara waited. "Crow isn't just a business rival. He's my half-brother." The words hit like a slap. Elara turned to stare at him, searching for signs this was a joke. His face remained serious, tired, honest. "What?" "My father had an affair, long before he married my mother. The woman was married too, to a merchant named Crow. Marcus was born from that affair. My father never acknowledged him, never supported him, left him to grow up thinking he was the merchant's legitimate son." "How did you find out?" "Marcus told me 6 months ago. Showed up with proof, letters between his mother and my father, acknowledgement of paternity, everything. He wanted recognition, a share of the inheritance, legal standing as a blackthorn." Elara's mind raced through implications. "You refused." I offered him money, a substantial settlement, but not the name, not the title. That wasn't mine to give. It was legally my mother's legacy, not my father's to distribute." Darius's voice hardened. "He refused, said he'd take everything I had if I wouldn't share it willingly. The business contracts, the social destruction, all of it. He's been orchestrating this for months. The marriage accusation hits hardest because he knows I needed a wife to maintain business relationships. Destroying that destroys everything." "You should have told me this earlier." "I know, but admitting I have a brother who wants me ruined felt like admitting my father's sins were still poisoning everything. I wanted—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I wanted. It matters to me." Elara processed this new information, fitting it into everything she knew. "Crow isn't just attacking your business. He's attacking your identity. Trying to prove he's the better Blackthorn by destroying you. Yes. Then we need to flip that. Show the magistrate his motivation. Prove this is personal vendetta, not legitimate legal concern." "How?" "He has proof of the affair, of my father's acknowledgement. That makes him legitimate in some courts. But it also makes him biased. A man seeking revenge for perceived wrongs isn't a credible witness." Elara stood, paced, thinking. "We present it tomorrow. Full disclosure. You tell the truth about the relationship, about the settlement offer, about his rejection and subsequent attacks. Make it clear he's weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. That exposes everything, makes me look weak. It makes you look honest. There's a difference." Darius stared at her like she'd just proposed jumping off a cliff. "If this fails, then we fail honestly, but at least we tried." Elara moved to stand in front of him. "You told me not to lie. Same applies to you. Tomorrow we tell the truth, all of it. About the arrangement, about the nightmares, about Marcus. We give them everything and let them decide what it means." "That's terrifying." "I know, but it's the only way through." They stayed up late, revising their strategy, incorporating this new information, preparing for total exposure. Around midnight, Elara finally stood to leave. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "Elara." Darius stood, moved closer. "Whatever happens, thank you for staying, for fighting, for—" He struggled for words, couldn't find them. "For being your wife," she offered. "For being more than I expected, more than I deserved." She touched his face briefly, feeling the rough stubble, the tension in his jaw. You deserve more than you think. Remember that tomorrow when they try to convince you otherwise. Then she left, before the moment could become something neither of them was ready for. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, people standing against the walls, the gallery overflowing with those who'd come to watch the Wolf of the Blacklands fall. Elara sat beside Darius at the defendant's table, wearing her best dress, hands folded calmly in her lap despite the terror churning her stomach. Marcus Crowe sat across the aisle, surrounded by expensive lawyers, looking perfectly composed. When his eyes met hers, he smiled, predator recognizing trapped prey. The magistrate entered. An older man, severe face, reputation for fairness but also for harsh judgments. He called the proceedings to order, read the charges in a voice that made each one sound like a conviction. Crowe's lawyer stood first. A woman, sharp-featured, voice like a blade. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Darius Blackthorne is not only a murderer who escaped justice through intimidation and bribery, but a fraud who has created an illegal business empire disguised by false respectability. His recent marriage is part of this deception, a contract arrangement with a desperate woman forced to comply through financial coercion. She called her first witness, a merchant who claimed Darius had threatened him into signing exclusive contracts. Then another who swore he'd seen Darius pay off investigators after his father's death. Then a doctor who suggested the elder Blackthorne's injuries before his fall were consistent with assault. Each testimony landed like a hammer blow. The crowd murmured. The magistrate took notes. Elara felt Darius growing tenser beside her. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer, a local man, competent but outmatched, called Mrs. Kane first. She testified to the legitimacy of the marriage, to seeing Elara and Darius together daily, to witnessing genuine partnership. The opposing lawyer tore into her testimony, suggesting she was a loyal employee who'd say anything to protect her employer. Margaret testified next. Then Annie. Then 3 townspeople who'd witnessed their market visits. Each time, the opposing lawyer found angles to undermine credibility. These were people dependent on Blackthorne money, people with incentive to lie. By afternoon, they were losing, badly. The magistrate called for a recess. Elara and Darius retreated to a small room behind the courthouse, both knowing they needed something stronger. We have to use the brother angle, Elara said. It's the only thing that explains his motivation clearly. That opens us up to questions about legitimacy, about my father's affairs. It also shows this is personal vendetta. That's reasonable doubt right there. Darius looked at her, and she saw the decision forming, fear and courage mixing into something like resignation. All right, he said, we do it. When proceedings resumed, their lawyer requested permission to call Darius to testify. The magistrate allowed it. Darius took the stand, swore his oath, and looked directly at the magistrate when he spoke. Marcus Crowe is my half-brother, he said. The courthouse erupted. The magistrate called for order. Marcus's face went pale, then red, then carefully blank. His lawyer objected loudly, demanding proof. Darius provided it. The letters, the acknowledgement, all of it entered into evidence. Then he told the whole story, the revelation, the settlement offer, the rejection, the systematic destruction that followed. This isn't about justice, Darius said, voice steady despite the chaos around him. This is about a man who feels he was denied his birthright, seeking revenge. Every charge he's brought is designed to destroy what he couldn't inherit. Marcus's lawyer cross-examined viciously, tried to make the affair evidence of family corruption, suggested Darius was lying about the settlement offer, attacked every detail. But the core truth remained. Motivation mattered, and Marcus had plenty. Then the lawyer turned to the marriage. Convenient timing, isn't it? She said. Your brother reveals himself, threatens your business interests, and suddenly you acquire a wife? The timing wasn't convenient, it was necessary. Necessary because you needed to appear stable, respectable, not because you actually wanted a wife. That's correct? Gasps rippled through the gallery. Their own lawyer looked stricken. Elara's heart hammered. This was the gamble, the all-in bet. So you admit the marriage is a business arrangement? The lawyer pressed. It started as one. Yes. Darius looked at Elara then, something raw in his expression. But intent and reality don't always match. What began as contract became something else. Something real. How convenient. The defendant discovers love just in time to defend against fraud charges. I didn't say love. Darius's voice went quiet but carried through the silent courthouse. I said real. We have a real partnership, real trust, real care for each other's well-being. That's not fraud. That's two people making the best of difficult circumstances and finding something worth protecting. The lawyer tried to undermine it, to make him contradict himself, but Darius held firm, answering every question with brutal honesty that left no room for doubt about his sincerity. Finally, she dismissed him. The magistrate called for final witness. I'd like to call Lady Blackthorn, the opposing lawyer said. Elara's stomach dropped. They'd expected this, but hoped it wouldn't come. She stood, felt Darius's hand briefly touch hers, support or warning, she couldn't tell, and walked to the stand. The oath. The preliminary questions. Then the real attack began. Lady Blackthorn, were you coerced into this marriage? No. Did Lord Blackthorn offer your family money in exchange for your hand? He offered to clear my father's debts. That was the arrangement. So you were bought. I was offered a way out of an impossible situation. I took it. The lawyer paced, building momentum. And in exchange for clearing these debts, what were you required to do? Marry him, appear at necessary functions, maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. Maintain the appearance. So you acknowledge it's not legitimate? I acknowledge it started as an arrangement, like many marriages in our society. Elara kept her voice level. But arrangements can become genuine. People can choose to make real what began as contract. Have you made it real, Lady Blackthorn? Or are you simply playing a role to save your husband from justice? And there it was, the question that would determine everything. Elara looked at Marcus Crowe, seeing triumph in his eyes. Looked at the magistrate, seeing skepticism. Looked at Darius, seeing fear barely contained. Then she made her choice. I'm not playing a role, she said clearly. I came here expecting a prison. I found a partnership. My husband is not an easy man. He's controlling, emotionally closed off, terrible at asking for help. But he's also honest, principled, and far more damaged by his past than damaging to others. I've seen him at his worst, nightmares that leave him shaking, grief he can barely contain, fear that he'll become his father. And I've chosen to stand with him anyway, not because I was paid to, because he's worth standing with. How touching, but nightmares and grief don't disprove murder charges. They prove he's human, that the monster everyone thinks they're prosecuting doesn't exist. Elara leaned forward. Marcus Crowe wants you to see a violent, unstable man because it serves his vendetta. But I live with Darius Blackthorn. I see who he really is, and that man is not what's being presented in this courtroom. The lawyer tried to break her testimony, to find contradictions, but Elara had truth on her side, and truth was harder to dismantle than lies. She answered every question, held every position, refused to be shaken. When she finally stepped down, she felt wrung out, but oddly calm. They'd done everything they could. The rest was up to the magistrate. Closing arguments happened in a blur. Both sides summarized. The magistrate took notes. Then he dismissed the court for deliberation. Elara and Darius sat in the defendant's room, not speaking, both too exhausted for words. Mrs. Kane brought tea, neither of them drank. Thomas stood guard at the door, face grim. An hour passed, then another. The wait felt endless. Finally, the bailiff appeared. The magistrate is ready. They returned to the courthouse. The crowd had grown. Word must have spread. Every eye tracked them as they took their seats. The magistrate stood. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, I find the murder charges unsubstantiated. The evidence suggests Lord Blackthorn's father died from injuries sustained in a riding accident, and any prior altercation, while regrettable, does not constitute criminal action. Relief flooded through Elara. Beside her, Darius remained rigid. However, the magistrate continued, the charges of fraudulent business practices and marriage deception require further investigation. I am ordering a formal audit of Lord Blackthorn's business operations and a probationary period of 6 months during which the marriage's legitimacy will be monitored. Not acquittal, not conviction. Purgatory. Furthermore, the magistrate said, I am dismissing the most serious fraud charges as they appear motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate legal concern. Mr. Crow, your relationship to the defendant creates significant bias that undermines your credibility as a witness. Marcus stood, fury barely contained. Your Honor, I object. Your objection is noted and overruled. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Chaos erupted, people shouting, lawyers arguing, reporters scrambling for the door. Elara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. They'd survived. Barely. But the threat remained, just delayed. Darius stood, helped her up with shaking hands. We need to leave. Now. They pushed through the crowd, ignoring questions shouted at them, and made it to their carriage. Only when the door closed and they were moving did Elara let herself breathe. 6 months, she said. We have 6 months to prove this is real. Or 6 months for Crow to find new ammunition. Darius leaned back, eyes closed. This isn't over. I know, but we bought time. That's something. They rode in silence until Blackthorn Hall came into view. Home, such as it was. Prison or sanctuary, depending on the day. The carriage stopped. Darius opened the door, helped her down. They stood together looking at the dark stone building, both knowing what came next would be harder than anything they'd faced yet. Thank you, he said quietly, for what you said in there about me being worth standing with. I meant it. I know, that's what scares me. Before she could respond, Thomas appeared, running from the house, face white with panic. My lord, my lady, you need to come quickly. Someone's broken into the West Wing. They've destroyed... He couldn't finish. They ran. The West Wing was devastated. Furniture overturned, books thrown everywhere, papers scattered like snow. But the worst was Darius's bedroom, the place where he'd survived his nightmares, where he'd shown her his vulnerability. It had been systematically destroyed. The bed ripped apart, the walls spray-painted with a single word in red. Murderer. And on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and torn pages, was a doll, crude, handmade, stabbed through the heart with a knife that pinned a note. 6 months won't save you. Nothing will. M. Elara felt Darius go rigid beside her, heard his breathing change, recognized the signs of panic setting in. This wasn't just vandalism. This was psychological warfare. Marcus attacking the one place Darius had felt safe. Get everyone out, she told Thomas. Now. Just us. When they were alone, she turned to Darius. His eyes were unfocused, his hands trembling, his breath coming too fast. He was spiraling, the trauma and the day's stress combining into something that looked like breaking. Darius? She took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. Breathe, you're safe. He can't hurt you here. He already did. The words came out broken. He knows. He knows about the nightmares, about this room, about... He couldn't continue. Then we take that power back. Elara kept her voice firm. We clean this up. We make it ours again. We don't let him win. But Darius wasn't hearing her. He pulled away, moved to the destroyed bed, picked up the doll with shaking hands. He's right. 6 months won't save me. Nothing will. This is who I am, the monster's son, forever marked, forever hunted. No. Elara grabbed his arm, made him face her. You are not your father. You are not defined by his sins or Marcus's hatred. You're Darius Blackthorn, and you survived things that should have destroyed you. You're still standing. That makes you stronger than both of them. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, and she saw the exact moment the weight became unbearable. He dropped the doll, sank to his knees among the wreckage, and finally broke. No words. Just raw, terrible grief that had been building for years, held back by control and necessity and sheer willpower. It poured out now, unstoppable, and all Elara could do was kneel beside him and hold on while the storm raged. When it finally subsided, when the shaking stopped and the breathing evened, Darius looked at her with something like wonder. You're still here, he said. Where else would I be? Anywhere. Nowhere. Anyone else would have run. I'm not anyone else. Elara helped him stand. And we're not done fighting. Marcus wants you broken. He wants you to prove him right, that you're unstable, that you're dangerous, that you inherited your father's darkness. So we prove him wrong. We survive this. We build something he can't destroy. How? Together. Like we've been doing. Like we'll keep doing until he realizes he can't win. Darius studied her face, looking for doubt or fear, finding only determination. You really meant it. What you said in court. About standing with me. Every word. He pulled her close then, not romantically but desperately, like she was an anchor in a storm. Elara held him, feeling him shake, feeling her own fear mixing with fierce protectiveness. He's coming for us, Darius said against her shoulder. 6 months or 6 days, Marcus won't stop until one of us is destroyed. Then we make sure it's not us. They stood together in the wreckage of his sanctuary, surrounded by evidence of Marcus's hatred, and made a silent pact. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not as contract partners, not as convenience, but as two people who'd chosen each other against all reason. The war had just begun, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Blackthorn Hall, Marcus Crow was already planning his next attack. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they worked. Elara and Darius moved through the destroyed West Wing like soldiers after a battle, cataloging damage, collecting evidence, documenting everything Marcus had done. Thomas and 2 trusted guards helped, their faces grim as they swept broken glass and gathered torn papers. He had help, Thomas said, holding up a boot print that didn't match any of the estate staff. At least 3 men, maybe 4. They knew exactly where to go, what to destroy. Inside information, Darius said quietly, studying the spray-painted wall. Someone here told him about the nightmares, about this room specifically. Elara felt ice settle in her stomach. A traitor in the household meant nowhere was safe. Every conversation could be overheard, every plan compromised. Marcus wasn't just attacking from outside. He'd infiltrated their home. We need to find out who, she said. Without alerting them, we know. Darius turned to Thomas. Who has access to the West Wing? Mrs. Kane, myself, Annie when she's cleaning, Margaret occasionally when she brings meals. The guards rotate, but only senior staff go past the main corridor. Start with the guards. Anyone new, anyone with debts or grievances. Do it quietly. Thomas nodded and left. Elara picked up torn pages from what looked like Darius's personal journal, entries about his father, about the nightmares, intimate details no one should read. Marcus had stolen more than property. He'd stolen privacy, safety, the illusion that anything was sacred. He wants you to feel violated, she said. That's the point. Not just physical destruction, psychological. It's working. Darius's voice was flat. Every trick my father used, Marcus learned them all somehow. Or invented his own. Cruelty doesn't need teaching. Elara set down the pages carefully. But here's what he didn't count on. You're not alone this time. You have people who'll fight with you. That changes the equation. Does it? Or does it just give him more targets? Fair question. Elara looked around at the destruction, at the evidence of Marcus's reach and resources. They were outmatched in money, manpower, and malice. Traditional resistance would fail, so they needed to be untraditional. We can't defend against this, she said slowly, idea forming as she spoke. We're always going to be reacting, always vulnerable. So we stop defending and start attacking. Attacking how? We don't have his resources. No, but we have something better, truth, and people who'll listen if we give them reason to. Elara moved to the window, looked out at the dark estate grounds. Marcus is counting on us hiding, being ashamed, defensive, isolated. What if we do the opposite? What if we expose everything, his vendetta, his methods, the fact that he's destroying an innocent man over inheritance he was never entitled to? That exposes us too. All our vulnerabilities. We already exposed them in court. The difference is control. Right now, Marcus controls the narrative. We take that back. We tell our story before he can twist it. Darius studied her, and she could see him running calculations. You're talking about going public, completely public. I'm talking about making it impossible for him to operate in shadows. He's using shame and fear as weapons. We remove those by owning every part of our story, including the ugly parts. That's insane. Probably, but so is sitting here waiting for him to destroy us piece by piece. They stood in silence, surrounded by wreckage, considering options that all felt impossible. Outside, dawn was breaking, gray light creeping across devastated furniture, making shadows out of destroyed belongings. "We'd need allies," Darius said finally. "People willing to speak publicly, to risk Marcus's retaliation. Then we find them. Start with the merchants he's threatened, the ones who testified against you under pressure. Give them a way out, protection if they tell the truth. That takes money we don't have, legal protection, security, so we get creative." Elara turned from the window. "What assets do you have that Marcus doesn't?" "Nothing. He inherited a trading empire. I inherited debt and enemies. You inherited land, lots of it, and loyalty from people who remember your mother." She started pacing, energy building. "The estate staff, the townspeople who smiled at us in the market, the farmers on your tenant lands, those are allies. Not powerful ones, but numerous. Marcus has money and lawyers. We have community. Community doesn't win legal battles. No, but it wins public opinion, and public opinion influences magistrates, business partners, everyone Marcus needs to maintain his position." Elara stopped pacing, faced him directly. "We build a coalition. Everyone he's hurt. Everyone who knows the truth. We make so much noise that ignoring it becomes impossible." Darius looked at her like she'd suggested storming a fortress with kitchen knives, but underneath the skepticism, she saw hope trying to surface. "That would take weeks to organize. The probation period is 6 months, but Marcus won't wait that long. He'll attack again, harder. Then we move faster. Start tomorrow. Today." Elara glanced at the destroyed room. "We use this. Document it, show people what he's capable of, make him defend his methods instead of attacking ours." "You're serious?" "Completely. Are you with me?" The question hung between them, not just about strategy, but about trust. About whether he was willing to bet everything on her instincts when conventional wisdom said to hunker down and survive. Darius moved through the wreckage, picked up the doll Marcus had left, stared at it for a long moment. Then he threw it into the cold fireplace. "All right," he said, "we do it your way, but if this fails, then we fail fighting instead of hiding. I can live with that." They started immediately. Mrs. Kane was summoned, shown the destruction, given a choice: stay and help expose Marcus, or leave with a generous severance and no hard feelings. She chose to stay. "That bastard destroyed Lady Catherine's memory along with everything else," she said, looking at the vandalized walls. "I won't stand for it." Margaret made the same choice. Then Annie, who cried but nodded fiercely. Then Thomas and 3 guards who'd served under Darius's mother. One by one, the household staff declared themselves not employees anymore, but allies. By noon, they had a plan. Step 1. Document everything. Elara spent the afternoon photographing the damage, writing detailed accounts, collecting evidence that would be impossible to dispute. She worked with methodical precision, turning violation into ammunition. Step 2. Reach out. Darius wrote letters to every merchant, business partner, and associate Marcus had threatened or coerced. The message was simple: tell the truth, and I'll protect you. Stay silent, and we all lose. Step 3. Go public. This was the risky part, the irreversible commitment. They would host an open gathering at Blackthorn Hall, invite the town, the merchants, anyone willing to listen. No secrets, no defensiveness, just honest testimony about what Marcus was doing and why. "He'll call it a publicity stunt," Darius warned as they finalized the invitation list. "Let him. We'll have witnesses, evidence, and numbers. He can't discredit everyone." Elara sealed another envelope. "When is this gathering?" 3 days. Gives people time to decide without overthinking. 3 days to prepare, to gather support, to hope they weren't walking into a disaster. Elara sent the invitations with Thomas, then returned to the destroyed West Wing. Cleaning it felt wrong somehow, like erasing evidence, but leaving it felt like letting Marcus win. She compromised, cleaned enough to be functional, left enough to remember. That night, lying in her own bed, Elara heard footsteps in the corridor. Not the nightmare sounds, these were deliberate, controlled. She got up, found Darius standing outside her door. "Can't sleep," he said. Keep thinking about the gathering, all the ways it could go wrong. Come in. She stepped back, let him enter her room for the first time. It felt strange, intimate in ways the West Wing visits hadn't been. Talk me through your concerns. They sat on opposite sides of her small sofa, and he listed every fear methodically. Low turnout, Marcus sending agitators, people too scared to speak publicly, the magistrate viewing it as manipulation rather than grassroots support. Elara listened, then offered counterpoints. We can't control everything, but we can control our message, our honesty, our willingness to be vulnerable. That's harder to attack than defensive posturing. You have a lot of faith in people's better nature. No. I have experience watching powerful men overplay their hands. Marcus thinks he's invincible. That arrogance creates openings. Darius was quiet for a moment. Then, why are you doing this? Really? You've had opportunities to walk away, to distance yourself. Why stay and fight? Elara considered lying, giving him strategic answers about self-preservation and contractual obligations, but they'd promised honesty. Because watching you survive your father's legacy made me realize I'm surviving mine too. Different circumstances, same damage, parents who failed us, debts we didn't create, lives shaped by other people's choices. You're fighting to reclaim your identity from your father's sins. I'm fighting to reclaim mine from my father's weakness. She met his eyes. We're the same. That matters to me. I'm not good at this, Darius said quietly. At having someone who cares. Every instinct says it's dangerous, that caring makes us vulnerable. It does make us vulnerable, but it also makes us stronger. Marcus is fighting alone, driven by hatred. We're fighting together, driven by something better. That's advantage, not weakness. He moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him. If this works, if we actually survive this and build something, what then? What do we become? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Then Darius stood, moved toward the door. Thank you, he said. For this, for everything. After he left, Elara lay awake thinking about futures she'd stopped letting herself imagine. Marriage that was more than contract. Partnership that was more than survival. Possibility. The next 2 days were chaos. Responses to the invitations came in waves. Some acceptances, some refusals, some cautious maybes. Elara and Mrs. Kane organized logistics, while Darius met with potential allies, building the coalition one conversation at a time. On the second day, their first major defection arrived. A merchant named Peter Graves showed up unannounced, looking terrified but determined. I testified against you in court, he said without preamble. Marcus paid me. Threatened my family if I didn't cooperate. I've been sick about it since. Do you have proof? Darius asked. Letters, payments, everything. Graves set a folder on the table. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but if you're really taking him on, I want to help. They reviewed his evidence, damning documentation of Marcus's coercion tactics, payments to multiple witnesses, threats made in writing. It was exactly what they needed. This goes public at the gathering, Elara said. You willing to testify? Yes, but I need protection. Marcus has men. You'll have it. Stay here until then. Thomas will assign guards. Graves looked like he might cry. Why? After what I did? Because you're doing the right thing now. That's what matters. Darius extended his hand. Welcome to the fight. By evening of the second day, they had 4 more witnesses. Each brought evidence of Marcus's manipulation, forged documents, coerced testimony, threats to families and businesses. The pattern was clear. Marcus had systematically corrupted the legal proceedings, buying or intimidating anyone who might challenge him. This is enough, Darius said, reviewing the collected evidence. Even if the gathering fails, we can take this to the magistrate. The gathering won't fail. Elara arranged documents into presentation order. People want to believe justice exists. We're giving them a chance to make it real. The morning of the gathering dawned cold and clear. Elara woke early, dressed carefully in the blue wool dress that had become her armor. She braided her hair, put on her grandmother's silver hairbrush, slid the wedding ring onto her finger. Every detail mattered. She needed to look like someone worth trusting. Downstairs, controlled chaos. Margaret and her kitchen staff preparing food for potentially hundreds of people. Thomas positioning guards to prevent violence while avoiding the appearance of intimidation. Mrs. Kane directing servants and setting up the main hall for presentations. And Darius in the library going over his statement one more time. "Stop," Elara said from the doorway. "You know what you're going to say. More practice will just make you sound rehearsed. I need to get this right. You need to be honest, that's all." She crossed to him, took the papers from his hands. "These people are coming because they want to know the truth. Give them that. Everything else will follow." He pulled her close suddenly, a brief fierce embrace that spoke of fear and gratitude and something neither of them had words for yet. "Whatever happens today, we face it together. I know." People started arriving at noon, slowly at first, cautious townspeople, curious merchants, a few brave souls willing to risk Marcus's notice. Then in larger groups, as safety and numbers encouraged participation. By 1 o'clock, the hall was packed beyond capacity, people standing in corridors, crowding doorways. Elara watched from a side entrance, counting. At least 200, maybe more. Far more than they'd hoped. And standing at the back, face carefully neutral, was Marcus Crowe. Her stomach dropped. Of course he'd come. Couldn't resist seeing his enemy's public humiliation. But his presence changed everything. Every word spoken would be heard by the man they were exposing. She found Darius, told him. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Good. Let him hear it all. Let him see what happens when people stop being afraid." At 2 o'clock, Darius stepped onto the raised platform they'd constructed. The crowd quieted slowly, conversations dying as attention focused forward. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I know many of you took risks being here. That matters more than I can express." His voice carried, not loud, but clear and steady. Elara watched faces in the crowd, saw skepticism mixed with curiosity. 6 weeks ago, I married a woman I barely knew to clear her family's debts and present myself as respectable. That's the truth. No romance, no courtship, just a transaction that benefited us both. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Elara held her breath. This was the gamble, leading with their biggest vulnerability. "But truth is complicated," Darius continued. "What started as arrangement became partnership. My wife," he looked directly at Elara standing to the side, "became my ally, my defender, someone who saw past the rumors to who I actually am. And I learned that contractual marriages can become real ones if both people choose to make them so." "Convenient timing," someone shouted from the back. Marcus's voice. "Yes, it is convenient," Darius agreed. "Just like it's convenient that Marcus Crowe, my half-brother, revealed himself and demanded half my inheritance right before launching a systematic campaign to destroy me." Shocked silence. Then chaos. Questions shouted, people talking over each other, confusion spreading like wildfire. Darius raised his hand for quiet. "Marcus Crowe is the illegitimate son of my father. He has proof of this, which he presented to me 6 months ago. I offered him a substantial financial settlement. He refused, demanding the Blackthorn name and title. When I couldn't legally give him that, he chose destruction. He laid out the timeline methodically. Marcus's revelation, the rejected settlement, the escalating attacks on business and reputation. Then he brought up Peter Graves. The merchant stood shakily, told his story of coercion and payment, showed the documented evidence, named Marcus as the source. Then the next witness. And the next. 4 people testifying to the same pattern: threats, bribes, manipulation, each account adding weight to the accusation. Marcus tried to interrupt, to object, but the crowd shouted him down. They'd come for truth, and truth was being delivered with receipts. Finally, Elara stepped forward. "I didn't want to be here," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I was sold into marriage to save my family from ruin. I expected a prison. Instead, I found a man fighting to overcome his father's legacy, violence, cruelty, damage that should have destroyed him but didn't." She looked directly at Marcus. "You're trying to destroy him using the same tools his father used. Fear, isolation, making him believe he's alone and broken, but he's not alone. And every day he survives your attacks proves he's stronger than the darkness you're trying to bury him in. Pretty words from a bought wife, Marcus called out. Yes, I was bought. Just like you bought witnesses, bought testimony, bought whatever you needed to make your vendetta look like justice. Elara's voice went cold. The difference is I chose to stay when I could have left. Your witnesses are here now, choosing truth over your money. That should tell you something about which side people actually believe. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in support. People calling out their own experiences with Marcus, sharing stories of intimidation and threats. The coalition Elara had imagined was forming spontaneously, anger finding collective voice. Marcus pushed through the crowd toward the door, face red with fury. This isn't over, he shouted. You think public opinion matters? I'll bury you in legal proceedings. You'll lose. Darius's voice stopped him. Because we're done playing your game. We're not hiding anymore, not defending, not apologizing for surviving what should have killed us. And every day we're still standing is proof you've already lost. Marcus stared at him, at the crowd, at the evidence displayed on tables around the room. Then he left, slamming doors behind him. The silence that followed felt like released breath. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire hall was applauding. Not polite social acknowledgement, but genuine support. Recognition. Elara found Darius's hand, squeezed it tight. They'd done it. Not won. The legal battles remained, Marcus would retaliate, nothing was resolved. But they'd shifted the narrative, claimed agency, proven they weren't the isolated victims Marcus needed them to be. The gathering continued for hours. People came forward with more stories, more evidence, more offers of support. Merchants pledged to testify truthfully in future proceedings. Townspeople offered to serve as character witnesses. Even the doctor who'd examined Darius's father appeared, bringing records that corroborated the accident narrative. By evening, when the last guests finally left, Elara and Darius stood in the emptying hall, surrounded by evidence of what they'd built. He's going to come back harder, Darius said quietly. I know. But now we have people watching, people who'll notice if evidence gets manipulated or witnesses disappear. He can't operate in shadows anymore. Mrs. Kane appeared with tea and exhaustion in equal measure. That was either brilliant or suicidal. We'll find out which. Probably both, Elara admitted. They retreated to the library, Darius, Elara, Mrs. Kane, Thomas, and Peter Graves, the inner circle, such as it was, reviewing what they had accomplished, planning next steps, preparing for inevitable retaliation. The magistrate will hear about this, Thomas said. Might view it as manipulation. Or as citizens exercising their right to be heard. Elara poured tea with hands that still shook slightly. We documented everything. If he investigates, he'll find the same evidence we presented. Marcus will claim we coerced witnesses, Graves said nervously. With what? We have no money, no power, nothing to offer except protection. That's not coercion. That's community. Darius accepted tea from Elara, their fingers brushing briefly. He's the one who used threats and payments. The evidence proves it. They talked strategy until midnight, until exhaustion made further planning impossible. One by one, people drifted away to rest, leaving Elara and Darius alone in the library. Thank you, he said, for pushing this. I never would have thought of it. You would have. Eventually. You're good at strategy. I'm good at defensive strategy. Survival, not offense. You taught me there's a difference. Elara set down her teacup, studied him in the firelight, the exhaustion in his face, the cautious hope trying to surface, the way he was finally allowing himself to believe they might actually win this. We made a good team today, she said. We did. He moved closer, tentative in ways she'd never seen him. Elara, what you said out there, about choosing to stay, did you mean that? Every word. Even though He gestured vaguely, encompassing all his damage, all his complications. Especially because of that. You're not easy, Darius. You're controlling and emotionally closed off and terrible at trusting people. But you're also honest, principled, and you fight for what matters. She paused, searching for words. That's rare. Worth protecting. He kissed her then, not tentative, not asking permission, just sudden honest need. Elara kissed him back, tasting desperation and relief. and something that felt dangerously like hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Real relationship, real trust. I'll probably mess it up." "Probably, but we'll figure it out." Elara smiled against his mouth. "That's what we do. Figure things out together." They stayed up talking until dawn broke over Blackthorn Hall, planning not just legal strategy but futures. What they'd do when the probation ended, how to rebuild the estate's reputation, whether the gardens should include roses or just herbs and lavender. Normal conversations, future conversations. The kind people had when they believed tomorrow was possible. When Elara finally returned to her room, sun was painting the eastern windows gold. She fell into bed still wearing yesterday's dress, too tired to change, and slept dreamlessly for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Hall. She woke to urgent knocking. "My lady!" Annie's voice panicked. "You need to come quick. It's the magistrate. He's here with officials. They're saying—" Elara was up and moving before Annie finished. She threw on a robe, ran downstairs, found Darius already in the main hall facing 3 stern men in official robes. The magistrate from their hearing stood center, holding a document. "Lord Blackthorn, Lady Blackthorn, I've received numerous complaints about yesterday's gathering. Accusations of witness intimidation, public manipulation, defamation against Marcus Crow." Elara's stomach dropped. Marcus had moved fast, turned their victory into ammunition. However, the magistrate continued, and something in his tone changed. "I've also received testimony from 17 independent witnesses confirming your accusations against Mr. Crow, along with documented evidence of his coercion tactics, payments to false witnesses, and systematic manipulation of legal proceedings." Hope flared. Elara grabbed Darius's hand. "Furthermore, the physician's records regarding your father's death have been thoroughly reviewed. They support your account of events. The original investigation was superficial but not incorrect in its conclusions." "What does this mean?" Darius asked carefully. "It means the charges against you are being dropped. All of them." The magistrate's expression remained stern, but something like approval flickered beneath it. "It also means Marcus Crow is now under investigation for perjury, witness tampering, and attempted fraud. His assets are being frozen pending trial." The words hit like physical force. Elara felt her knees weaken, felt Darius's grip on her hand tighten to painful. "The probationary period?" she managed. "Cancelled. Your marriage has been adequately demonstrated as legitimate. The monitoring period is unnecessary." The magistrate's face softened fractionally. "I'll admit, when you first appeared in my court, I had doubts. But what you've built here, the community support, the documented evidence, the willingness to be publicly vulnerable, that's not something people fake. That's real." He handed them the official documents, waited while they read through legal language that meant freedom, vindication, victory. "Mr. Crow has fled the territory," the magistrate added. "Warrants have been issued for his arrest. If he returns, he'll face immediate prosecution." After the officials left, Elara and Darius stood in the silent hall, holding papers that changed everything. "We won," she said, still not quite believing it. "We survived. That's better." Darius pulled her close, just holding her while reality settled in. "Marcus is still out there. He could come back." "Let him. We'll be ready." Mrs. Kane appeared with the rest of the household staff, all of them crying or smiling or both. Margaret produced celebratory breakfast. Thomas opened wine that had been aging since Darius's mother was alive. The formal household dissolved into something more like family, celebrating survival and victory in equal measure. Later, when things quieted, Elara found Darius in the East Gardens. The restoration was nearly complete now, pathways clear, beds planted, the fountain running again. He stood near the sundial, running his fingers over the inscription his mother had chosen. "Time wounds all things, but gardens heal," Elara read over his shoulder. She believed that. Even at the end, when my father destroyed everything she'd built, she believed healing was possible. She was right. Look at this place. Look at us. Elara took his hand. "We're proof healing happens, even when it seems impossible." Darius turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly peaceful. "I never thought—" I didn't imagine we'd actually make it here. That someone like you would choose someone like me. Someone damaged choosing someone damaged. That's not unusual. It's human. It's more than that. You're more than that. He kissed her softly. I love you. I don't know when it happened, but it's true. Elara felt tears sting her eyes, happy ones, earned ones. I love you too, even though you're terrible at asking for help and you work too much and you still have nightmares. The nightmares are better since, he paused, since I stopped being alone with them. They stood together in the restored gardens while morning sun warmed the stone pathways and made the fountain sparkle. Somewhere beyond Blackthorn Hall, Marcus was running, defeated for now, if not forever. The legal battles were won. The marriage was real, and two people who'd been sold and traded and damaged by their parents' failures had chosen each other freely, built something neither of them thought possible. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real was enough. Real was enough. But reality didn't pause for celebration. 3 days after the magistrate's ruling, news reached Blackthorn Hall that Marcus had been spotted 2 territories north, still running. Warrants followed him, but enforcement in frontier regions was spotty at best. He was out there, wounded and dangerous, and Darius knew wounded animals were the most unpredictable. Let him run, Elara said when Darius mentioned it over breakfast. Running means he's lost. Chasing him means we haven't moved on. He could regroup, come back with new accusations. Then we'll handle it. But I'm not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for a man who's already proven he can't win. She poured more tea, deliberate and calm. We have actual work to do. The estate needs attention, business contracts need rebuilding, and I have gardens that won't maintain themselves. Darius studied her across the table, this woman who'd arrived expecting a prison and stayed to build a home. When did you get so practical? Around the time I realized panic doesn't solve problems. You taught me that, actually. All those nightmares you survived by just surviving. One breath, then another, until morning came. I had help with that. He reached across the table, took her hand. The gesture still felt new, still carried weight. Still do. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely. Twice more in the past week, Elara had woken to sounds of distress and made the walk to his room. But they were changing, less frequent, less severe, and Darius was learning to pull himself out faster. Healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. Mrs. Kane entered with the Morning Post, looking more cheerful than Elara had ever seen her. Letters from 3 merchant houses requesting meetings about renewed contracts, and an invitation from the mayor. They're hosting a dinner honoring citizens who demonstrated exceptional integrity during recent difficulties. She set the letters down with satisfaction. That means you, in case it wasn't clear. Public recognition? Darius looked uncomfortable. That seems appropriate, Elara finished. We stood up publicly. They're acknowledging it publicly. Accept the invitation. After Mrs. Kane left, Darius picked up the merchant's letters, reading with an expression Elara was learning to recognize. Cautious hope mixed with disbelief. These are the same houses that canceled contracts when the accusation started. Now, they want back in. Business follows stability. You're stable now, or stable enough. They're just catching up. She stood, moved to look over his shoulder at the letters. Which ones do you actually want to work with? All of them, honestly. The estate needs the income. Then negotiate from strength. You're not desperate anymore. Make sure they know it. It was good advice, the kind Darius would have given someone else but struggled to apply to himself. Elara was learning his blind spots. He could read people brilliantly, strategize with precision, but still saw himself through his father's cruel lens. Unworthy. Damaged. Lucky to be tolerated. She made it her mission to prove him wrong, one small correction at a time. The mayor's dinner was scheduled for the following week, which gave them time to prepare. Elara commissioned a new dress. Not extravagant, but well-made, the kind of clothing that spoke of quiet prosperity rather than desperate pretense. Darius ordered a proper suit, uncomfortable with the formality but understanding its necessity. We're performing again, he said the night before, watching Elara try on the new dress. No, we're participating. There's a difference. She turned, let him see the deep green silk that brought out colors in her eyes she'd never noticed before. Performance is pretending to be something you're not. Participation is showing up as what you are and letting people see it. Philosophical. Practical. I'm tired of hiding, aren't you? He was, actually, exhausted by it. The weight of secrets and shame, the constant vigilance, the assumption that honesty meant vulnerability meant death. Marcus's defeat had proved that wrong. Honesty had been their strongest weapon. The dinner was held in the town's largest hall, decorated with an optimism that felt deliberately pointed. Flowers everywhere, music playing, people dressed in their finest. Elara and Darius arrived together, her hand on his arm, both of them braced for scrutiny. Instead, they got warmth. The mayor greeted them personally, shook Darius's hand with genuine respect. "What you did, standing up to Crow, exposing his methods, that took courage. This town doesn't forget that kind of integrity." Other guests approached throughout the evening, merchants offering apologies for believing rumors, townspeople thanking them for making the territory safer, even people who'd never met them before expressing admiration for how they'd fought back. It was overwhelming. Elara watched Darius navigate it with growing confidence, saw him start to believe that maybe he deserved recognition instead of condemnation, saw him relax fractionally, smile more easily, accept compliments without immediately deflecting. Halfway through dinner, Peter Graves approached their table, looking nervous but determined. "Lord Blackthorn, Lady Blackthorn, I wanted to thank you again. Publicly this time, where people can hear." "You don't need to," Darius started. "Yes, I do. You gave me a chance to make things right when you had every reason to refuse. That matters." Graves addressed the nearby tables, voice carrying. These two didn't just defend themselves. They defended all of us who'd been manipulated or threatened by Crow. They built a coalition when they could have run. That's leadership. Applause rippled through the hall. Elara felt Darius's hand find hers under the table, squeezed tight. He was terrible at accepting praise, but he was learning. The evening continued with speeches, toasts, more acknowledgement than either of them knew how to process. When it finally ended and they returned to the carriage, both collapsed against the seats with exhausted relief. That was... Darius couldn't find words. Affirming? Uncomfortable? Both? Elara kicked off shoes that had been beautiful but merciless. "You did well. Didn't threaten anyone, didn't flee, barely flinched when people touched you." "I wanted to flee. Multiple times. But you didn't. That's progress." They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing conversation wasn't required. Outside, the frontier landscape passed in darkness. Wild lands Darius's ancestors had claimed, his father had brutalized, and he was slowly learning to steward properly. "I've been thinking," he said as Blackthorn Hall came into view, "about the estate, what it could become instead of what it's been." "Tell me." So he did. About plans to modernize the farming operations, invest in the tenant families rather than just extracting rent, build schools and infrastructure that would make the territory genuinely prosperous instead of barely surviving. Ideas he'd had for years but never thought he'd have the stability to implement. "That takes money," Elara said. "Years of investment before returns. The merchant contracts will help, and I have some savings my father never found. My mother hid money for me in case I needed to run. I never did, but it's there." He turned to face her. "What do you think? Is it naive, thinking we can actually change things here?" "It's ambitious, but we've already done things people said were impossible. Why stop now?" That became their project over the following months. While Darius rebuilt business relationships and negotiated contracts, Elara threw herself into improving the estate and surrounding lands. The gardens expanded to include practical crops alongside ornamental ones, herbs for medicine, vegetables for the kitchen, flowers that could be sold in town markets. She worked with Margaret to establish a training program for young people wanting to learn cooking professionally, helped Thomas organize a community watch that protected outlying farms from bandits, started a lending library in town using books from Blackthorn Hall's extensive collection. Small changes, but they accumulated. People started referring to the Blackthorns with respect instead of fear. Farmers brought concerns directly to Darius instead of suffering in silence. The estate became a place people came to for help rather than avoiding. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks. A harsh winter that killed half the garden plantings? A merchant who tried to restart rumors about the marriage's legitimacy? Persistent nightmares that sometimes left Darius shaken for days. But they faced each problem together, built solutions collaboratively, refused to let obstacles become defeats. 6 months after the magistrate's ruling, Elara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Twice. She sat in the garden with this knowledge, trying to process implications. A child, growing inside her, product of a marriage that had started as transaction and become something neither of them had planned. Fear hit first. What did she know about motherhood? Her own mother had been weak, ineffectual, more concerned with appearances than actual care. And Darius, he'd survived horrific childhood abuse. Would he know how to be a father, or would his father's violence echo through generations? Then excitement pushed through the fear. A child who could grow up safe, loved, free from the damage that had defined both their lives. A chance to build something completely new. She told Darius that night, in the library where they'd first established terms. He was working late, as usual, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. "I'm pregnant," she said without preamble. His pen stopped mid-word. He looked up slowly, face cycling through shock, fear, wonder. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor. I wanted to tell you first before making it official." Darius stood, crossed to her, stopped just short of touching like he was afraid she might break. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, confused." Elara took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "How do you feel?" "All of those. Plus," he struggled for words, "plus hopeful, which is new." They stood together in lamplight, his hand on her belly, both contemplating futures that suddenly felt very real and very immediate. "I don't know how to be a father," Darius admitted quietly. "Mine was a monster. I have no good model, no—" "Then we figure it out together, like everything else." Elara covered his hand with hers. "We know what not to do. That's a start, and we have time to learn the rest." "What if I mess it up? What if I'm like him?" "You're not. You've spent your entire adult life proving you're not. And even when you're controlling or closed off or terrible at emotions, you're never cruel. That's the difference." Darius pulled her close, held her carefully like she was precious. "We're really doing this. Building a family. Looks like it, unless you have objections." "None. Just—" He laughed, surprising both of them. "Just shocked. Good shocked. The kind I didn't know existed." They told Mrs. Kane the next morning. She cried, hugged them both, immediately started planning nursery arrangements and dietary requirements. Margaret began researching proper nutrition for pregnancy. Annie squealed so loudly half the household came running. The news spread through the estate, then the town, bringing congratulations that felt genuine. People who'd witnessed their journey from contracted strangers to actual partners seemed invested in this next chapter. But not everyone was happy. 2 weeks after they announced the pregnancy, a letter arrived. No return address, handwriting Elara didn't recognize. Darius opened it, read it, went white. "What?" she asked. He handed it over silently. "Congratulations on the child. Pity it will grow up fatherless. You think you've won, but this isn't over, not while I'm breathing. Enjoy your peace. It won't last." M. Marcus. Still out there, still watching, still threatening. The magistrate's ruling hadn't ended him, just delayed the confrontation. "He's bluffing," Elara said, trying to sound confident. "He's running out of options. Empty threats are all he has left." "Maybe, or maybe he's planning something worse than threats." They increased security, warned the staff, contacted the magistrate about the letter. Warrants were already active, but Marcus remained uncaught, operating from shadows. The threat hung over them like storm clouds. Elara tried to focus on pregnancy, on preparing for the child, on maintaining the improvements they'd built. But fear lingered, not for herself, but for the baby growing inside her, for Darius who was finally learning to be happy, for the fragile peace they'd constructed. 3 months into the pregnancy, everything came to a head. Elara was in the garden when Thomas found her, running, face panicked. "Lady Blackthorn, there's a fire. The south barn. It's spreading fast." She ran. Smoke was already visible, black and thick, pouring from the largest barn where they stored grain and equipment. Flames licked through the roof, driven by wind that pushed the fire toward the main house. Staff were already forming bucket lines, but the fire was too big, too hot, moving too fast. Elara joined them anyway, hauling water until her arms screamed, shouting instructions, trying to coordinate chaos into organization. Where was Darius? She found him near the barn entrance, trying to save horses trapped inside. The heat was overwhelming, smoke choking, but he kept going back, leading terrified animals to safety one by one. "Stop!" Elara screamed. "The roof's going to collapse!" He ignored her, went back for one more horse. The roof groaned, timbers cracking. Elara ran toward the barn, thought only of pulling him out, saving him before the structure fell. She'd almost reached the entrance when Thomas grabbed her, held her back. "You can't! The baby?" The roof collapsed with a sound like the world ending. Flames shot skyward. Smoke blinded everything. Elara screamed Darius's name, fought Thomas's grip, terror obliterating rational thought. He was in there, under burning timbers, dead or dying while she stood helpless. Then movement in the smoke. Darius emerged covered in ash, coughing violently, dragging the last horse by its lead rope. He stumbled, fell, got up again through pure determination. He was alive. Elara tore free from Thomas, reached Darius just as he collapsed. "You idiot!" she sobbed, checking him for injuries. "You absolute idiot! What were you thinking?" "Horses," he managed between coughs. "Couldn't leave them. You could have died. But I didn't." He pulled her close despite the ash and heat, despite their audience. "I didn't." The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the south barn was destroyed along with most of their stored grain and equipment. The damage was substantial, months of work and revenue lost, but no one had died. The horses were safe. The main house stood untouched. Investigating the fire revealed what they'd suspected: arson. Accelerant used, multiple ignition points, clear evidence of deliberate destruction. Marcus's signature. "He's escalating," the magistrate said when he arrived to review evidence. "This goes beyond harassment. This is attempted murder." "Can you find him?" Darius asked, voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "We're trying, but the frontier is vast and he knows how to hide." The magistrate looked genuinely sympathetic. "I can offer increased patrols, but you can't protect us forever. We know." Elara held Darius's hand, felt him trembling with exhaustion and aftermath adrenaline. "What do we do?" The magistrate hesitated, then, "Officially, I can't suggest this. But if Marcus Crow were to meet with an accident while evading arrest, no one would question it too hard. You understand what I'm saying?" He was giving them permission, not explicitly, but clearly. Handle Marcus themselves, and the law would look the other way. Elara felt Darius tense beside her, knew he was considering it. Marcus had tried to kill them, was still trying, would keep trying until someone stopped him permanently. Self-defense was justified, expected even. But it was also exactly what Marcus's father would have done. Violence answering violence, perpetuating the cycle. "No," Darius said quietly. "We're not doing that." The magistrate looked surprised. "Lord Blackthorn, he tried to burn you alive. I know what he tried. And killing him would prove him right, that I'm my father's son, that violence is the Blackthorn legacy. I won't give him that." Darius stood, pulled Elara up with him. "We'll find another way. Legal, public, permanent, but not murder." After the magistrate left, looking both disappointed and impressed, Elara turned to Darius. "You're sure? Because I would understand if—" "I'm sure. Breaking the cycle means actually breaking it, not just finding justified exceptions." He touched her belly gently. "This child deserves better than a father who kills his enemies, even when they deserve it." They spent the next week rebuilding. The barn couldn't be restored quickly, but they salvaged what they could, redistributed resources, adapted. The community helped. Farmers donated grain to replace what burned. Merchants extended credit. Townspeople showed up to clear debris. Peter Graves arrived with a crew of workers and paid them out of his own pocket. "You saved me from myself once. Time to return the favor." The collective response to the fire did more than repair damage. It proved they'd built something real, Not just a marriage, but a community that believed in them, that would fight to protect what they represented. Meanwhile, the search for Marcus continued. Patrols expanded, rewards were offered. His description circulated to every settlement and trading post in the region. 2 weeks after the fire, word came. Marcus had been spotted at a border town trying to hire mercenaries. The local sheriff had recognized him, attempted arrest. Marcus resisted. There had been a fight. Marcus fell from a horse during the confrontation, broke his neck. Dead before the doctor arrived, the same way his father, their father, had died. The symmetry was almost poetic. The sheriff sent a full report, witness statements, everything required for official closure. The magistrate reviewed it, declared the case resolved, closed all investigations. Marcus Crowe was gone. Finally, completely, legally. Elara heard the news feeling nothing but tired relief. No triumph, no vindication, just the exhausted gratitude of surviving something that should have destroyed them. Darius took it harder. She found him alone in the library, staring at the fire, the sheriff's report on his desk. "He's dead," Darius said without looking up. "My brother, who I never really knew, who hated me for things I didn't do." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "I'm not sure I am. That's what bothers me." He turned finally, and Elara saw genuine grief in his face. "He was terrible, cruel, obsessed, willing to kill to hurt me. But he was also my father's victim, made cruel by the same man who made me." He stopped, shook his head. "I should feel something other than relief." Elara sat beside him, took his hand. "You can feel multiple things. Relief that the threat is over, grief for what he could have been, anger at your father for creating this whole mess. None of those cancel the others out. He died the same way our father did, falling from a horse. That's coincidence, or justice, or just random bad luck. It doesn't mean anything except that he's gone and we're safe." Darius leaned against her and she held him while he processed emotions too complicated for words. Outside, spring was turning the estate green. Inside, they were finally, truly free. The pregnancy progressed. Elara's belly grew, movement became visible from outside, reality became undeniable. She and Darius attended medical appointments together, prepared the nursery, argued good-naturedly about names. "Catherine," Darius suggested. "If it's a girl, after my mother, that's beautiful. And if it's a boy, not Thomas, I won't saddle him with my father's name." He thought for a moment. "James, simple, strong, no baggage. Catherine or James Blackthorne, I like both." They settled into routines that felt sustainable. Darius working but not obsessively, taking breaks to check on Elara, learning to balance ambition with presence. Elara managing the gardens and household while her energy allowed, accepting help when she needed it, letting people care for her. Mrs. Kane appointed herself chief pregnancy supervisor, monitoring Elara's diet and rest with military precision. Margaret created special recipes designed to support both mother and child. Annie helped prepare the nursery, sewing tiny clothes with obvious excitement. The estate thrived. Contracts. Darius had rebuilt generated steady income. Investments in infrastructure started showing returns. The town regarded Blackthorne Hall as a community asset rather than a threatening presence. 7 months into the pregnancy, Elara woke in the middle of the night to pain and wetness. Her water had broken. Labor was starting early. Darius went from asleep to fully alert in seconds. "I'll get the doctor. Don't move. Don't. I have to move." That's how labor works. Elara gripped his hand through a contraction. "Just stay calm. We prepared for this." But they'd prepared for a full-term delivery, not 7 months. The doctor arrived quickly, examined her, looked concerned but controlled. "The baby's coming. It's early but viable. We need to move fast." The next hours blurred into pain and fear and exhaustion. Elara had read about childbirth, thought she was prepared, discovered she'd been naive. Nothing prepared you for this. The overwhelming physical reality, the terror that something would go wrong, the primal determination to survive. Darius stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, talking her through contractions, letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb. She screamed at him twice, apologized once, mostly just focused on breathing and pushing and surviving one moment to the next. Finally, after what felt like years, a sound. Thin, angry, absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," the doctor said, holding up a tiny, red, furious creature. Small, but breathing. "She's a fighter." Catherine, their daughter, real and alive and here. They placed her on Elara's chest, this impossibly small person, and she stopped crying immediately. Just looked up with unfocused eyes, trusting completely that these strangers would protect her. Elara started crying. Couldn't stop. 7 months of fear and hope and fighting, and here was the result, fragile and perfect, and theirs. Darius touched Catherine's tiny hand with one finger, looking terrified and awed. "She's so small." "She's early, but strong." Elara adjusted the blanket around their daughter. "Like her father. Like her mother." He kissed Elara's forehead. "You were incredible. I've never seen anything—" His voice broke. "Thank you. For her. For everything." Catherine needed special care those first weeks. She was underweight, struggled with feeding, required constant monitoring. Elara barely slept, running on adrenaline and determination. Darius helped however he could, learning to change nappies and prepare bottles, taking shifts so Elara could rest. It was exhausting, overwhelming, the hardest thing either of them had done, and absolutely worth it. Slowly, Catherine grew stronger, started gaining weight, feeding better, sleeping in longer stretches. Her eyes focused, tracked movement, seemed to recognize her parents' faces. She was going to survive. Thrive, even. 3 months after Catherine's birth, Elara stood in the East Gardens holding her daughter, watching Darius work alongside estate farmers to plant new crops. The morning was beautiful, cool spring air, sun warming the stone pathways, flowers blooming everywhere. "See that man?" she said softly to Catherine. "That's your father. He survived things that should have destroyed him. And now he's building something better than what came before. You're part of that, the best part." Catherine made a small sound, something between coo and complaint. Elara laughed, adjusted her hold. Mrs. Kane approached with tea. "She's growing beautifully, looks more like you every day." "She has Darius's stubbornness, refuses to sleep when she's decided it's unnecessary." "Perfect combination, then. Your intelligence, his determination." Mrs. Kane smiled. Lady Catherine would be so proud. Seeing her garden restored, her son happy, her granddaughter healthy. This is what she hoped for. Elara thought about the woman she'd never met, who'd loved gardens and raised a son in impossible circumstances, who'd survived as long as she could before giving up. "I wish I'd known her. She'd have loved you, would have recognized a kindred spirit, someone who fights for what matters." Darius finished with the farmers, walked over wiping dirt from his hands. He'd changed so much in the year since Elara arrived. Still serious, still controlled, but lighter somehow. Like weight he'd carried forever had finally been set down. "How's our girl?" he asked, touching Catherine's cheek gently. "Hungry, opinionated, perfect." Elara handed her over, watched Darius cradle their daughter with confidence he'd developed through practice and determination. "Thomas brought news from town," he said, rocking Catherine absently. "The mayor wants to rename the main square, Blackthorn Square, in honor of the family's contributions to community welfare and justice." Wow. Are you comfortable with that? A year ago, no. Now? He looked around the estate, the gardens, the life they'd built. "Now I think maybe the Blackthorn name can mean something other than fear. Catherine deserves to inherit something better than shame." Elara leaned against him, the three of them together in the garden his mother had loved. Around them, the estate hummed with productive life. Farmers working, servants going about their duties, the whole operation functioning smoothly. "We did it," she said quietly. "Built something real from a contract neither of us wanted." "You did it. I just survived long enough for you to show me how." "We did it together. That's the only way it works." Catherine fussed, demanding attention. They walked together toward the house, talking about evening plans and tomorrow's tasks, and all the mundane concerns of people who had futures to plan for. Behind them, the gardens bloomed. The sundial caught sunlight, its inscription still visible after all these years. "Time wounds all things, but gardens heal." Thomas Blackthorne had been a monster. He'd damaged his son, destroyed his wife, left scars that would never fully fade. His legacy should have been darkness and pain, but Darius had survived, had found someone who saw past the damage to who he actually was, had chosen healing over perpetuating hurt, had broken the cycle. And now there was Catherine, growing up safe, loved, free from the violence that had defined previous generations. She'd inherit the Blackthorne name without the accompanying shame, would know her father as someone strong enough to be gentle, powerful enough to be kind. That was victory. Not defeating Marcus, though they'd done that. Not rebuilding the estate, though they'd done that too. Real victory was this: a family that chose love over fear, a future built on something other than survival. The nightmares still came occasionally. Bad days happened. Nothing was perfect. But in the restored gardens of Blackthorne Hall, under spring sun that warmed stone and skin alike, Elara and Darius stood together holding their daughter. Two people who'd been sold and traded and damaged, who'd found each other in desperate circumstances, who'd chosen to build something better than what they'd inherited. They didn't just survive the storm. They became the shelter others sought when their own storms came. And that legacy, that choice to heal instead of harm, to build instead of destroy, that was worth more than any inheritance, any title, any victory won through violence. Catherine would know this, would grow up in gardens her grandmother planted, her mother restored, her father protected. Would learn that broken things can be mended, that damaged people can choose differently, that love is something you build deliberately, one choice at a time. The Blackthorne legacy had been rewritten, not by denying the past, but by refusing to let it dictate the future. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.